Not every video will be about Gravity Falls, but this one definitely will be. You know, I guess 2 hours wasn't enough, and I still have more to scream into the void about Stanford Philbrick Pines. Speaking of my last video, and don't worry, I'll keep this part short for people who've never seen me before. Hi, nice to meet you. Holy shit, it blew up. It was my first video, and within a month I had 75,000 views, which is just mind-blowing. Thank you so much to everyone who watched it. I set out to make that video as a passion project about my favorite show, and it's been an absolutely unreal experience. So thank you so much to everyone who chimed in. I had the nicest comments, and everyone was just the best video. I'm not so sure about one of your favorites. You know Jenny Nicholson is on this platform, right? Guys, this is very sweet, but guys, you know that my cat's litter box was in half of the shots? Is this best video on YouTube material? I mean, don't get me wrong, genuinely, I was blown away by how supportive, kind, and overwhelmingly enthusiastic everyone was. So, thank you. Well, except this guy. Joke's on you. You think I'm making 2-hour video essays about why I relate to a man who spends his late 20s writing in his diary about how being ostracized as a kid gave him a complex because I wasn't bullied? Ha. Okay, buddy. I get that the joke he's going for is that being gay and talking about queer stuff is supposedly cringe, but looking back, maybe being bullied is what made me queer to begin with. Every day, otherwise uncringed children are transed by bullies. Stop bullying. Sis, a child. Well, I'm here now, and so after that I just gotta, deliver on great content. Pew pew. If you build it, it will come, right? Well, I built it, and you all have arrived, so now I just gotta keep on building. Just gotta make the best video ever, but also more. I could do that again. I just gotta do that again. I mean, that algorithm potential isn't gonna boost itself, baby. And the good news is I have a topic ready on hand for a quick 15-minute video while I think about what I'm gonna do next. I've been wanting to make a video or an essay or just a Tumblr post for a long time, working out the details of the Gravity Falls timeline. So we're back in 2012-ish. A timeline isn't very clear. A timeline does exist in the fan wiki, but some of the details are a bit contentious within the fandom, and also it doesn't have specific dates for everything. That being said, the Gravity Falls wiki is one of the most complete fan wikis I've ever seen. I don't know who runs this thing, but Godspeed to you. I put out a timeline on my own Tumblr in 2015-ish, maybe 2016, before Journal 3 came out. But as you can imagine, it's not accurate anymore. The journal promised to deliver on a gazillion details about what Ford was up to in Gravity Falls in the 80s and specifically when, and it delivered, and in doing so, it completely threw my own headcanons out the window, just ruined what I'd put down on paper. Alex Hirsch obliterated my headcanons with facts and logic. Specifically facts about what Ford was doing and what year he was doing it. You know, I still get replies on my old timeline from 2015 like, Ford says something in Journal 3 that actually contradicts a point in the 7-year-old Tumblr post. Yes, Jerry. I know. I've read it. Never changed Tumblr, except maybe a little. But I've also been in this fandom long enough to know that for every fan of the show, there's another version of this timeline because there's a lot that's up to interpretation. We all have our own tweaks, we all have our own flares, we all have our own idea of who the baby is.
Okay, so in A Tale of Two Stands, was that baby Shermie Pines?
I cannot talk about the baby. Baby's off limits. Next question.
Is it supposed to be Shermie? Does it make more sense if it's Shermie's baby? Oh, we'll get to you, Pines. And I know that Alex Hirsch has said no actual canon Gravity Falls timeline exists.
I'm not sure it all quite lines up timeline-wise.
That It takes place in a vague, timeless summer with no year attached to it. But part of me wonders if he says this because he's not confident that all the dates match up. But you know, I have a lot of confidence in Alex. He's probably just being modest. I'm sure I can figure it out, no problem. I just gotta dig deep, you know? After all, the timeline I made in 2015 mostly holds up, so I'm pretty sure I could reuse at least some of the efforts I put in back then when I was supposed to be studying for my college biology final. Just a quick video, just something to boost me in the algorithm. I just need something. Probably just a good 15 minutes? I mean, maybe I could do an 8. How long does it take to recount a timeline? Maybe I can get away with stealing the Channel Federation video? Think anyone will notice? I know it's an easy pitch, but come on guys, I just need some content before my next big video or the unknowable eldritch god that is the YouTube algorithm will chew me up and spit me out. I need something to fill in the gap between my last big project and my next multi-hour long form video essay with dynamic lighting, makeup, backdrops, and set design. A bitch has to eat in this economy. So this video will probably be a short one, just a real bathroom stall quickie, just something to hold me over until my next big project, in which you guys get to watch a 20-something bitch attempt to reach the highs of their last carefully curated video essay. Like a floundering, anxious Icarus who recently got a text from their therapist asking if he can close their file because their health insurance doesn't cover mental health care and they haven't been able to pay out of pocket for the last 3 months. Not that I need you, Eric. It's fine. This video will be fine. Regular content warnings now for foul language, in case you couldn't tell, and of course for whatever jokes I think are funny, because even though this is in fact my second video about a Disney cartoon from 2012, I am, as a matter of fact, a tax-paying adult. A tax-paying adult with too much time on their hands. And by too much time on my hands, I mean I have 3 jobs and no time on my hands. I've just stopped sleeping, and it's worked wonders for me. So, what are we waiting for? Let's recount the Gravity Falls timeline for Daddy YouTube's algorithm. Ah, fuck. Wait. I should probably have some kind of intro theme sequence. In the last video, I had a whole, theme song. It had, a cork board, and my friend gave me these candles. I gave those candles back. I don't have any fucking candles. When you look up how to be a YouTuber on youtube.com, you get a lot of videos like have consistent style, have consistent branding, and I'm on video 2 and I'm already fucking that up, so I should probably go think on that. I'll be back with the timeline in a second. I'm gonna go think about what my intro's gonna be. Alright, from the top, make it drop. Here's a canon compliant ass timeline. Alright, just a general heads up, no piece of art, cartoon or otherwise, is really designed to be approached with a magnifying glass and a CinemaSins ding counter. I love this show. I love it so much it hurts, warts and all, and while I personally have fun with this kind of overwrought over-analysis, making a timeline out of a cartoon that was never meant to have this kind of timeline assigned to it is really more of a thought exercise than it is a critique of the show. This isn't going to be me saying, Dipper said he's worn this hat every day since the 5th grade in the journal, and yet there's a flashback from the 4th grade in the show showing him wearing the same hat. Plot hole, ding. Alex, you hack. I guess this show is bad, and retroactively I've never liked it. I hope it goes without saying that that's not what we're doing today. I'm overanalyzing the show because it's fun to me, not to scrutinize and pick apart something that I love out of some sadistic show of superiority. Dipper saying 4th grade instead of 5th doesn't mean that it's a bad show, it just means that the writers put down 4th grade instead of 5th. Or it means, for the purposes of this kind of video, we can theorize that he got the hat in the 4th grade, but only began consistently wearing it since the 5th. That's the kind of theorizing that we're doing here. I'm not trying to dunk on the show, I just think making timelines out of serialized cartoons is fun. And yes, I am fun at parties. Also, I think it goes without saying that the show itself encourages this kind of over-analysis. Like, they want you to solve the clues. This is the same show that had every piece of a Visioneer key in the background as they ran past, just one letter at a time. Like, they want you to pay attention. I'm doing it. I'm solving the clues. I'm doing a Gravity Falls. What was that accent? I was possessed by Chris Pratt's Mario. Hey, Bowser, I'm doing a Gravity Falls. So let's do it. Let's look at the details. Let's list out the timeline as decided upon by the fandom. I feel confident. Again, sorry about the short video. Gravity Falls follows twins Dipper and Mabel Pines, who go up to Oregon to live for a few months with their great uncle Stan in the mysterious town of Gravity Falls, which is full of cryptids and elements of the supernatural. Eventually, the twins discover that Stan has a secret interdimensional portal in the basement, which was built 3 decades ago by his long-lost secret twin brother, Stanford. And this will never not be the coolest thing ever. Look at him! He had a secret twin brother lost in another dimension! What the fuck? The biggest plot points in the show, chronologically speaking, that we need to put on the timeline are as follows. Number 1. Stan and his freaky 6-fingered brother. Can't even do it with a straight face. This is fun. Stan and his twin brother Ford find a boat in a cave as kids sometime in the 1960s, and it inspires them to one day be seafaring adventurers. 2. Their dreams are dashed in their senior year of high school when Ford gets this opportunity to go to his dream college, and then Stan subsequently accidentally ruins those chances. Stan, as a result, is kicked out of their home by their father. After Stan is kicked out, he spends the next 10 or so years homeless, falling into some dangerous groups implied to be the Colombian cartel. In that time, Ford studies at his backup school. He needs to work twice as hard, and he eventually gets a grant to go study anomalies and cryptids in Gravity Falls. While he's studying in Gravity Falls, Ford is manipulated by Bill Cipher, an interdimensional alien, also described as a dream demon in the journals, who tricks him into building an interdimensional portal. What Bill doesn't tell him is that this portal is going to usher in the apocalypse. Ford does eventually catch on to the plan, but not before he makes a deal with Bill that gives Bill essentially permission to possess him in his sleep. And then, being in over his head, he calls Stan for help, and Stan shows up. And then Ford does this.
Remember our plans to sail around the world on a boat? Take this book, get on a boat, and sail as far away as you can.
Our genius, everybody. And then they fight, and then in the fight, Ford gets pushed through the portal. 30 years later, Dipper and Mabel, Stan and Ford's grandnephew and grandniece, visit their great-uncle Stan in Gravity Falls. This is the entirety of the show. The summer that they visit is when the show takes place, from beginning to end. Toward the end of the summer, Ford comes back, and then the apocalypse does happen, but it only lasts about a week. And then, after this, Stan and Ford go on their adventure together. The Stans finally go on a boat, the show is over, and I miss a biology lab to watch the finale on a library computer. Can you tell I didn't do well in biology in college? So from here, we should be able to figure out all the details. The years that we do know that are pretty well established in the show are 1982 for the portal incident, when Ford is pushed through. After all, in the room in Carpet Diem, which Ford calls his electron carpet room, it's like not even his study or his spare guest bedroom or something like that. It's his electron carpet room. Imagine if your living room was just named after what decor you had in it. Oh, this isn't the living room. This is the lamp room. It's where we keep this neat lamp. It's totally normal. I love it. But that room has been sealed away since June of 1982. Going by the calendar that is hanging up when they do finally open it again during the course of the show. And if the show takes place 30 years after that, then the show takes place in 2012. The summer of 2012. And that makes sense, because 2012 is the year that Gravity Falls aired on the Disney Channel. And because Dipper and Mabel are turning 13 in 2012, we can deduce that they were born in August of 1999. This is cake. We're just doing simple math. We got this. We also know that Stan was kicked out of their family home 10 years before the portal incident.
You haven't seen your brother in over 10 years.
Who is it? Have you come to steal my eyes?
So that would be 1972. That means that they were high schoolers then, around 17 or 18 in 1972, and we can just put that down. Incidentally, Shermie Pines, Dipper and Mabel's grandfather, also seems to have been born this year. Look at his cute little baby face. That's the face of a baby that doesn't disrupt the timeline. No, he doesn't. Look at that cutie patootie. So if the Stans are 17 going on 18 in 1972, it means that they were born in 1954. And if they were 12 going on 13 when they discovered the Stan Award, then they did that in 1967. Alright, we did it! Now we just gotta get the dates from Journal 3 and plug those in. I have my journal right here. So, Ford was kind enough to just give us a timeline and put all these dates conveniently on one page. Yeah, perfect. So it says that in 1975, he arrived in Gravity Falls to study, probably right after he got his PhD and his grant. And yeah, in 1981, he met Bill Cipher. It says Discovery of Muse, which is what he called Bill Cipher before he realized that Bill was betraying him. Alright, yeah, we did it. Fuck yeah. Alright, everyone, thank you so much for watching. If you could like, comment, and subscribe. Well, this is the thing, like, Ford says that he got his PhD 3 years ahead of schedule, but 1972 to 1975 just doesn't seem right. Like, if he graduated high school in 1972 and then got his PhD 3 years later, that's not just 3 years ahead of schedule, that's just impossible. Not to mention, in the show, Darlene, the spider lady, it doesn't matter if she's in one episode, but she describes Stan as being about 70, and I think Stan describes himself that way too.
I mean, look at me. I'm pushing 70 and I still eat ice cream for dinner.
But if Stan and Ford were born in 1954, then they wouldn't be pushing 70 in 2012. Hell, they'd only be 58. Not to mention Shermie. If this baby is Shermie, Dipper and Mabel's grandfather, and he was born in 1972, then that means he'd only be 27 when Dipper and Mabel were born in 1999. Which would mean that both he and his child, Dipper and Mabel's parent, would be about 12 or 11 when Dipper and Mabel were born. That just doesn't seem right. Not to mention, if Journal 3 takes place in 1982, why does it have references to Tetris and Ghostbusters, which both came out in 1984? And is that a fucking Casper and Wendy reference? Okay, let's try again. Alright, I'm inclined to give this show here the benefit of the doubt, and especially Alex Hirsch. He was the showrunner of my favorite show, along with a very talented team of people. And Gravity Falls became a fucking phenomenon on his first series, and this is really an anomaly. It's been like 6 years since Gravity Falls ended, and people are still clamoring for whatever new Netflix series Alex Hirsch may or may not have next. Twitter threads and analyses and expectations are piling up about what Alex may or may not be cooking up at Netflix. I think that GF fan has a video kind of compiling whatever evidence on the show we have so far, as well as any information on whether or not it still exists and hasn't been cancelled. So, who knows? The jury is out. I do not know what Alex Hirsch is going to be following up his magnum opus with, or even if Gravity Falls is going to be his magnum opus by the time his career is over. But I do know that Gravity Falls is really fucking good. Like, it's great. And I love this show, so I really want to believe that this timeline makes sense. I don't want to believe this baby is a plot hole. I want to believe that this is a purposefully placed baby. I want this to make sense. I don't want him to be a hack. Maybe we're just not looking closely enough. Alex Hirsch himself has said that there are things in Journal 3 that haven't been discovered yet. Maybe I can discover them, who knows? Maybe this timeline could be cracked, and maybe I could be the one to do it. So, this is what we're gonna do. We've got a corkboard here. We're probably not gonna need all this real estate, it's just good to have on hand, you know? I did a lot of research, a lot of digging into the canon, and we're just gonna lay it out piece by piece by piece so that we don't lose track of what happened when. As you can see, we have a timeline laid out from 1945 to 2015, just covering all of our bases. We'll be able to lay out events in the journal, as well as any, real-world references. I did a lot of research into the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and oh my god, those fucking 80s. By the way, I just want to say, just before we jump in, I've been in Gravity Falls theorizing communities for a long time, and while I am 99% sure that everything that I come up with in this video came from my many hours of research, it is very possible that there have been theorists who have touched on some of this stuff before. I did look, I really did, but Tumblr is a tough site to search on. It's hard to find something that you came across on your dashboard 5 minutes ago, let alone 5, 6, 7 years ago, which is when the theorizing communities were the most active. I say all this to say that if I do mention a theory or some piece of evidence that somebody before me has put on Tumblr or anywhere, I put my Tumblr down in the description below, and please send me an ask, send me a message, send me some way of knowing who came up with what and when so that I can cite them correctly in the description below. I don't want to inadvertently take credit for something that someone discovered in 2015. By the way, since writing and recording this script, I did find a Reddit post that includes a couple of the points that I thought I found out first. I didn't see this until the week I'm publishing, and my video does differ from the timeline in this link in multiple spots, but this Reddit post is like 4 years old, so I wanted to give credit where it's due, and that's linked below. One more rule, and something really important for the purposes of this video. Like I said, there are plenty of 70s, 80s, 90s pop culture references in journals, comics, etc. Some of these things don't quite exist in our world, but they have real-world analogs. It's like how ABBA becomes BABA, or how Ghostbusters becomes Phantom Bustifiers. Meanwhile, some things do exist in real life, like Stanley Kubrick and the moon landing and Ovaltine and Ronald Reagan. Sorry to break it to you, but Ronald Reagan is real and he is hiding under your bed to trickle down into your nightmares. It's fine. He's not real. He's not real. He's not real. He's not real. In the case of actual things that exist in our universe, like the latter examples, I'm going to be using those to assess when something is happening. Like if Ford mentions in Journal 3 what Carl Sagan wore on the show Cosmos, then we can be pretty confident that he is writing that passage after Cosmos aired in 1980. My rule is this: as long as it mentions the real-life name of a person, place, thing, or intellectual property, I'm going to count that to decide dates on this timeline. Meanwhile, if it just references it vaguely but doesn't use the actual name, like how he references a warp pipe that I know exists in 1988 Super Mario Bros. 3, but he doesn't say Super Mario Bros. 3, well then I'm not going to really count that. Because I know when Ghostbusters came out, but I don't know when Phantom Bustifiers came out. So I've got some Post-its and some color-coded tape because the organization makes me feel like a person. And if something is a reference that very much exists in the real world, like Ronald Reagan, I'm going to mark it down in green. If something is only vaguely referencing something in our world, I'm going to mark it down in pink. Everything else, just general facts and information that we're keeping track of, I'm going to use yellow. So let's begin with one of the earliest dates we're given: Stan and Ford's childhoods. Yeah, maybe I could begin a billion years ago with the UFO crash landing in Gravity Falls, but I don't care about the UFO. I care about Stan and Ford, so we're gonna begin with 1960-something. Stan and Ford's childhoods are really only shown on screen on the show for maybe a combined 15 minutes at most. We do have an entire story on their childhood in the comics Lost Legends, and we do have a few screenshots in the journal, but the only dates we're canonically given are 1960-something.
It all started a lifetime ago. 1960-something. Glass Shard Beach, New Jersey.
This is the year, seemingly, that they found the Stanowar in a cave on the beach. And it's arguably the inciting incident for most of the emotional beats of the show, at least as far as the Stans are concerned. So I'd really like to put a specific date on it. So we need to put that year together with whatever identifiable features exist in the show in 1960-something. Identifiable features of the environment would be stuff like what kind of music are they listening to, what's on TV, what kind of atrocities of the past do they have on display. It could be anything. And in theory, we could use this year, the year that they found the Stanowar, and then subtract 12 years to find the year that they were born. But that's going to be difficult. Because even if we do know what year it is when they find the Stanowar, we have no way of knowing for sure how old they are. I'm inclined to say these two are 12. There would be some parallel themes at play if we have these two knuckleheads finding adventure at the same age that Dipper and Mabel found their adventure. But we don't really know that for sure. We're never told how old they are the way that we're told how old Dipper and Mabel are. The assumption that I think the show wants us to come up with is that they're the same age because they have similar body proportions, like similar head to body ratios. See this ratio? That's the 12-year-old ratio right here. But I've also seen it thrown around a lot in the fandom that they're maybe 9 or 10. And I get it. For one thing, this isn't really a show where we can use human proportions to tell the age of someone. It sure is a cartoon. But for another thing, the Stans genuinely sound young in this episode, like way younger than Dipper and Mabel. But this might have something to do with the fact that Dipper and Mabel are voiced by two voice actors who were in their 30s when the show began. While these two, Stan and Ford's child sonas, are voiced by actual preteen children. I think Jason Ritter and Kristen Shaw might have warped our ideas of what 12-year-olds actually sound like.
A shipwrecked sailboat, possibly haunted by pirate ghosts. This is the greatest thing I've ever seen. And I once saw a dead rat floating in a bucket.
To be honest, I don't think Jason Ritter sounds 12. I mean, he sounds very much like Dipper. He really suits the character, but he doesn't sound like a 12-year-old to me. He sounds like a 30-year-old with voice cracks.
Soon we're gonna be actual teenagers!
Like, I mean that with love and respect and admiration for what he brings, but I do mean it. Still, no age is given, so for our purposes, I'm putting their ages when they find the boat in the general ballpark of being between 8 and 13. Is that readable? I hope that's readable. It says between 8 and 13. Wait, I could edit. We're fine. You're fine. And if they're between 8 and 13 in 1960-something, which would be the range of any year between 1960 and 1969, then that puts their year of birth between 1947 and 1961, depending on what age between 8 and 13 they happen to be. So this is the range for their date of birth. We also kind of know when they were in high school. Because while they were in high school, we see this portrait of Nixon in the office of the principal during what is assumedly their senior year. We're assuming it's their senior year because Ford is being academically scouted for colleges, and also we've seen the boys at their senior prom. So if they're between 17 and 19, which is typical for a high schooler, when Nixon is in office, then that means that Nixon's time in office between 1969 and 1974 makes the most sense for them being 17 to 18, and for a range to fit in their science fair project incident, the one that got Ford out of the running to go to West Coast Tech. West Coast Tech, of course, being Ford's dream school. And if this is the range for them to be in senior year of high school, then that drastically changes the range that we have down for their date of birth. We need to subtract high school age from 1969 to 1974. It means their date of birth would need to be between 1950 and 1957. Not to mention, if they're between 8 and 13 when they discover the Stanowar, then that makes this date only viable between 1960 and 1968. Alright, we have an 8-year span for when... Hope that's not going to be a long-term issue, but it probably will be. Guess I'm pinning down sticky notes. So we have a span of 8 years here. Now we just need to look at what was actually in their environment at the time and see what we can find. Alright, now this I could work with. Okay, let's look at what we got here. These crayons are pretty identifiably Crayola. Crayola crayons began to feature this angle design flip top in 1958. We have a Lincoln log, a popular toy in the 50s. We have a kind of Flip the Frog, just like with a slightly different, card combination. Flip the Frog was popular in the 30s. We have a Magic 8 Ball from 1946. This poster is what I believe to be a reference to Invasion of Mars from 1953. We have Candyland, kind of. And I think this is a reference to Creature to the Black Lagoon, which came out in 1954. You think Ford ever watched Creature from the Black Lagoon? Guess I'm a fake fan. This poster back here, MOTHRA, I believe is a reference to The Fly, which came out in 1958, but it could also be a reference to the movie Tarantula, which came out in 1955. It's tough to say. Now, the interesting thing here is this Pit Cola bottle. I was thinking that maybe I could find a 1-to-1 comparison between the shape of this bottle and a bottle of maybe Coca-Cola. But the problem is that this seems to be a brown bottle, and the only brown Coca-Cola bottle I can find in this range was from the 1910s, like 1916 about, which means it's an old bottle, which tracks. Everything in this room is older than the 1960s range that we have down, which they live above a pawn shop and they don't have a very well-off family. It makes sense that they wouldn't have brand new toys. Well, you know what? This at least, confirms that them having stuff that isn't after this period means that I have a good range. It's at least not 1968 or 1969. At least probably not. So let's see what else we can find. This does take place in the lead paint district.
I lived with my ma and pa in the lead paint district of the family pawn shop.
Let me see how long lead paint was used. I have my laptop. Let me just do a... Okay, so lead paint was being produced as early as the 4th century BC. That's not really helpful. But hey, it takes place after the 4th century BC. I will say, though, there is one more detail here. Let me see. So we have on the floor here a pair of Groucho Marx glasses. Groucho Marx glasses actually date back to the 1940s, so I know what you're thinking, like, it's just another old toy. But this isn't just any old toy. You see, Ford doesn't just have entries in a journal, Dipper does too, and Dipper describes going into Grunkle Stan's mind, probably during the episode Dreamscapers. And in that episode, he describes seeing Groucho Marx glasses at Stan's bar mitzvah at the age of 12. Stan tried to wear the glasses to temple. So we can associate these glasses to kind of being around the age that Stan was 12, or at the very least to the year that he found the Stan Award. After all, in the comics, we see the same glasses on the floor in his room, which leads me to believe that that page of the comics takes place in the same year that they find a Stan Award. Yeah, that's a zoom in and enhance right there. I did a zoom in and enhance. We're doing it. We're doing a Gravity Falls. By the way, in the case of this being their bar mitzvah, it did strike me as a bit odd. After all, typically bar mitzvah celebrations are held when a boy turns 13, not 12. Typically speaking, when a Jewish girl turns 12, she has a bat mitzvah. My first thought was, well, trans rights. We've done it. We confirmed it. This isn't where I expected the trans representation in Gravity Falls to be, but I'll take it.
And that is why, the Statue of Liberty is our hottest landmark. Right, I lied. She's kind of mannish.
Yeesh, Stan. You gotta do better. I know you're a million years old, but you gotta do better. Look, sometimes the smelly old pieces of shit we hyperfixate on are problematic. It happens to the best of us. It's fine. You can go back to your fanfictions about Stan beating up cat collars or whatever. It's what fanfiction is for.
If you like fixing stuff, nothing could use more fixing than my Grunkle Stan.
But then I looked it up and there's actually another explanation. Bar mitzvah dates are determined by the Hebrew calendar, which goes by a combination of lunar and solar dates instead of just solar, like the Gregorian calendar, or the one that we're more familiar with. And while some Jewish families might go by the 13th birthday on the Gregorian calendar for determining when to celebrate bar mitzvah, at least as far as I can tell by my Googling, the majority of Jewish families go by the Hebrew calendar. But because it's a different calendar, this means that sometimes a Jewish boy will turn 13 on the Hebrew calendar while he's still 12 on the Gregorian calendar. So it is possible that Stan is a cis man and still can have his bar mitzvah at 12. Or it could be a typo. Maybe Dipper inherited his great-uncle Ford's proofreading talents. But assuming that this isn't a typo, why should that matter? After all, we don't have any conclusive evidence that they had these glasses only around the time that they were 12. They could have had it well before. But we do know that they had it after. After all, this looks around the age they are in the comics after they find the Stan War, so I'm willing to assume that this happened around the same time. After all, the glasses are in the same place in the floor, like right by the bottom bunk. Let me do this. Let me make it easier to just track the two notes. There, it's a line. You know that the two are connected now. Look, we're doing a Gravity Falls. But you know what? Forget about their age when they find the Stan War. Because if Stan and Ford's bar mitzvah happened when they were 12, that would mean that their date of birth would need to be on a day on the Hebrew calendar that corresponds to a date on their 13th year before they turn 13 on the Gregorian calendar. Let me spell this out. So we know that their birthday is June 15th. Dipper conveniently lets us know, but so does Bill in the journal. So in that case, this means that their birthday can't be 1950. Because if their date of birth is June 15th, 1950, then that would be Sivan 30 on the Hebrew calendar, which would mean that they reach bar mitzvah on June 22nd in 1963, which means they would already be 13 years old, not 12. But if their birthday is 1951, that would mean that it's Sivan 11 on the Hebrew calendar, which would mean that their bar mitzvah is in May of 1964. And May is before June 15th, so they would technically be 12 when they celebrate their bar mitzvah. So all I gotta do is check every June 15th date of birth within this range over here using a bar mitzvah calculator. And then we just need to see which ones correspond to a bar mitzvah date that happens before the Stans turn 13. So they would have a bar mitzvah while they're 12. Let me just jump on my laptop.
1 minute later.
Only one date works. The only date that works is June 15th, 1951. This corresponds to a bar mitzvah on May 22nd, 1964, when the Stans would still be 12. We did it. We have our first concrete date. The Stans were born on June 15th, 1951. Unless Stan is trans, which, why not? Let people have fun. But even if he isn't, we still have Ducktective. God, I love this transgender duck. Finally, some unproblematic representation. This is a wild amount I'm planning to put into picking a birthday. I can't believe that the writing team cross-checked every year to find one that made sense and then left this clue in the journal. Well, that or their birthday was just picked to be June 15th because that was the date that episode 1 of Gravity Falls aired. But having a bar mitzvah at 12 is just so specific. Shout out to me not noticing that my lights were off this whole time. I'm doing it, I'm a YouTuber. So even if we do have a concrete date of birth for their Stans, the only issue is that we still can't be sure that them finding the Stan War, is happening around their 13th birthday. Just because they have the Groucho mask doesn't mean that, they bought it around this date. They could have had it for years. They have a room full of old toys. Or, they kind of do behind all this stuff. Let me move this. There, now you can see it. They have a room full of old toys. As far as stuff in the actual TV show, though, we don't have a lot more scenes in them. But we do have this. Oh, we're gonna zoom and enhance on this tiny detail. Zoom and enhance technology. That's right. Oh my god. Zoom and enhance technology. That's right. That's a fucking Sharpie. Just look at that. It's a Sharpie. Well, why does it matter? You're wondering why it matters? Let me tell you why it matters. Sharpies were released in 1964. And I hate that I need to put it down in pink. I'm only putting it down in pink because I'm not seeing a name, and my rule is names. But that's a Sharpie right there. Obviously, the writing team of Gravity Falls put that in knowing that we would look up when a Sharpie was made. Oh my god. Further yet, do you know what company originally made Sharpie? That's right. Stanford Brands. And what does Stanford sound like? You fucking know it. Stanford University. And who goes to Stanford University? Smart people. Listen, it all adds up. It just bugs me that they don't have the name. Like, it's so obviously a Sharpie, but knowing Gravity Falls, it's probably a Schmarpie or something like that. It's a Parpie. Oh, you know everyone's favorite permanent marker. A Barpie. Okay, so let's look at the comics. We have this page over here, but we also have a few others. So as you can see, in the main story with the Stans, they already have the Stan Award. Like, they've already discovered it. So this takes place after this, which takes place after they run out of their room, at least chronologically shown in the show. There are a few more details in the comics. Like, we see a few things like a fortune-telling machine, but those date back to the 1800s, early 1900s, so it's not very helpful. But we do have a metal roller coaster. Metal roller coasters were not very common in this era. In fact, I think the first one would have been 1960 or 1962 in Ohio. And in that case, then I'm fairly confident that this would put them after 1962, unless in the world of Gravity Falls, this is the first metal roller coaster, but come on, it's New Jersey. How much innovation could there be? And there are a few other things in the comics we can really scrutinize, like, when were freak shows made? When was the Jersey Devil discovered? And when were flashlights discovered? And when were Polaroids discovered? But honestly, I looked into all of these and they're all well before the 50s. When were hellholes invented? But there is something else here. That's right, boys, we have another zoom and enhance. So we have here a reference to the comics that Stan was reading at the time. I read them all. Captain Nazi Puncher, Skimperella, The Excessive Force. The first one is pretty clearly Captain America. That would date this to 1941. The next thing we have is the Excessive Force. The X-Men were not made until 1963. But then we have this last one, Skimperella. This could be any number of skimpily dressed, superheroines from this era. But I think this is a reference to Barbarella. I can't wait for someone in the comments to go, actually, this isn't a reference to Barbarella. This is a reference to Wonder Woman or some other character. To which I'd say, I don't know anything ever about anything ever, including comics. And if you ever thought I knew anything about anything ever, that says more about you than it does me. I'm really trying not to fill up too much space over here because I feel like we're gonna have more sticky notes to put down here. So, Barbarella, the comics, came out in 1964. This is another thing that came out in 1964. I'm just gonna I gotta do it again. If it was Barbarella, I'm just gonna say, these parents should not be letting these kids read or watch Barbarella. I've only seen the movie Barbarella, but I'm just gonna say, it is very horny. Barbarella fucks a lot. And that's fine. No judgment. Get that dick and go. But she gets a lot of dick before she goes. She'll meet people and they'll say, hey, wanna fuck? And she'll go, okay. Just slurping that dick like ramen noodles. What a movie. The villain in that movie, by the way, is this evil lesbian with an eye patch.
You're very pretty, pretty, pretty. My name isn't Pretty, it's Barbarella.
She's one of the only characters in a movie Barbarella doesn't fuck. And of course not. We can't show the youth lesbianism. That's inappropriate. And it'll take screen time away from the slow motion striptease. Fucking love that movie. But yeah, between the Sharpie that isn't a Sharpie and Skimperella that isn't Barbarella, I'm willing to really put this into like the 1964 zone. But there is one more thing. So this is a quote from one of the magazines that Ford reads. The quote is by Lil Brucey S, age 11, and it says, "Baby, I was born to run away." And this is a pretty plain reference to Bruce Springsteen's Baby, I Was Born to Run. So we have an age over here, age 11. So we would just need to look up what year it would be that Bruce Springsteen is 11. But this is the thing. Bruce Springsteen was 11 in 1960. And I'm not confident that this is Bruce Springsteen. Like, I know it says Brucey S, but we don't have his full name here. Brucey S might not even be Bruce Springsteen. It could be Bruce Swayze. It could be Bruce Sterling. There isn't a portrait to go with it like Nixon. We only have a first name, but without it being a full name, it can't be set in stone. Do I put more stock in this being Bruce Springsteen than I count this into being a Sharpie? I mean, this is a Sharp. They're the same thing. It's the same picture. Corporate set, the same picture. If this is Bruce Springsteen, we have one reference to 1960 that I'm definitely gonna put down in pink. Wow, shout out to that falling down. It's fine. So on one hand, we have this reference to Bruce Springsteen being 11 before summer starts, which would place this comic and subsequently this television scene where their room looks exactly the same as the comic in 1961, which means the Stan twins are 9, turning 10 the year they found the Stan War. On the other hand, we have references to Sharpies, which came out in 1964, Barbarella, which was a comic strip in 1962 but came out as a book in 1964, and X-Men, which only came out in 1963. All of these things would have come out after 1961. I'll also point out that this math in this scene feels closer to math being done by a 7th grader, not a 10-year-old. And I know Ford's a genius, but he's doing this on a classroom chalkboard, which to me makes me think this is part of a school assignment. I'm gonna call it, and I'm gonna say that they found the Stan War in 1964. They would be 12, going on 13. So, yeah. I could agonize over this all day. Like, this Springsteen thing is gonna bug me, but I guess we're just assuming it's some young child named Bruce, and the writers were just making a bit. Maybe specifically a bit to just thwart me personally. After all, the magazine that Bruce Springsteen's name appears in might be an old magazine. Everything else in their room is relatively old. I don't have all day. I gotta move on. Not to mention, I think I'm gonna need a little bit more space. Okay, I got a second corkboard. And yes, this is a corkboard and not 4 12 by 12 pieces of cork that I got from the CVS that I cut down into the shape of a corkboard. This is a corkboard. I'm not broke, you're broke. And we're just gonna like kind of carry on some of the information over here. You know, I don't think we're gonna need much more space than this. I feel like this is more than enough. So in 1969, Nixon was inaugurated. Yeah. And this actually works out great, because if their date of birth is June 15th, 1951, as we've established, and they were 12, turning 13 in 1964, then it actually makes sense that their high school year would be during the Nixon administration, specifically between 1969, 1970, and 1971, depending on if they were 17, 18, or 19 in high school. Any of these are feasible. This is our new range that we're paying attention to. So, chronologically speaking, what's the next piece of information that we have? Stan's date with Carla McCorkle. People date in high school, right? I wasn't allowed to date in high school, so I'm assuming this exclusively on watching Hannah Montana growing up. High schoolers date. right? And I know that we have the Jukebox Diner date, the one that takes place in the 1950s themed 1970s diner. We're gonna just, like, put a pin in that. Wait. Corkboard. We put a pin in it! We're doing it! I also know that this design, and this design as well, is, like, really different from how Stan looks like as a teenager in the show in A Tale of Two Stans. But I believe that Alex said that they just kind of retconned the designs because a new designer, I think it was Emmy Cicierega, just designed better designs and they decided to use them. They just liked them more. So that's not really so much of an unexplained inconsistency. Also, bodies change, guys. Bodies change. So as far as anything else happening that year, we also have prom. Prom would have probably happened in their senior year. That's typical. Most likely between March and May. It typically happens in the spring. I'll also note that both of these prom outfits are outfits that you would see in the late 60s, early 70s. Stan's is a bit more dated to the 70s, and Ford's looks like it's a bit closer to some 60s designs, at least based on the fashion research I can find. I've learned my lesson. I'm using a pin that's gonna inevitably fall down. Late 60s, early 70s. And now we get to go to a scene that has probably the most things in the background that we can use to date this era. One paddle paddle, two paddle paddle.
Man, that Jackie O, what a fox.
So we have a few things here that we could actually put a date on. Alright, so on the table over here, it's hard to make out, but we have what looks like to be a Bush radio. Obviously the brand name isn't on there, so I marked it in pink. But it looks to be aged around the 1960s, just based on similar designs, though honestly, who knows. We have this Tiffany-esque lamp. It's not a real Tiffany lamp. What are they, made of money? But this is kind of like one of those mid-century lamps that would have begun to be popularized in the late 50s. They also have a fridge over here that looks like a Philco. This logo over here actually looks like an upside-down chrome piece that would be on some 1950s Philco fridges. I could be wrong about that, but it's the closest I could find. This probably is a Schmilco or a Bilco or something like that, but yeah, so that's around the 50s, which makes sense. They wouldn't have new appliances. We also see on the other side of this scene after Ford enters a macrame owl. Macrame was a massive trend in the 70s in particular. You can find tutorials on macrame throughout vintage women's magazines throughout the decade. And while that might point on first glance to indicate that this scene takes place in the 70s, Rob Renzetti and Alex Hirsch say this in a DVD commentary.
Like, I'm not sure it all quite lines up timeline-wise.
I tried to make it line up as much as
Rob
it
is the
would make
timeline
sense.
guy. Whenever there's a question about dates and numbers and ages and years, I would defer to Rob and just say, all right, tell me what it is, and I won't worry about it.
Well, you know,
you can put the macrame owl on the wall. Technically, that's maybe 2 or 3 years early, but I guess there would have been some outliers that would have had those already at that point.
He's right that a few stragglers began working on macrame art before the 70s. Here's a book from 1967 that helped popularize it. Renzetti doesn't give an exact date, but him pointing out that the Pines were early adopters of the trend really solidifies this for me as being closer to 1969. Though this doesn't completely exclude 1970 from being possible. But that, of course, leads us to the next bit of information.
Man, that Jackie O.
What a fox. Jacqueline Kennedy was the wife of the late President John F. Kennedy, who was, of course, shot in the head. R.I.P. And I would love to fit in an entire fucking tangent on Jacqueline Kennedy. I really would. This woman's life is just really fascinating. But for our purposes, the only thing we need to know is that in the late 1968, she remarried, after the death of her husband, of course, to a Greek magnate and longtime friend named Aristotle Onassis. So, Aristotle Onassis had recently divorced his wife. The thing is that Jackie was Catholic, and was very much loved at first by the Catholic community in the United States, and also just worldwide. But she was marrying someone who was divorced, and Aristotle's wife was very much still alive. The Catholic Church weighed in and said that Jackie was a sinner, just living in a sinful marriage. They said that she was ineligible to receive sacraments, and the American public just completely fucking turned on her. So for the next year, Jackie Kennedy, who was now called Jackie O, short for Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, because she had remarried, Jacqueline's life was made a living hell by the American paparazzi. The American media was dedicated to tearing down her good, graceful image and the goodwill that she'd garnered as First Lady, though honestly, the paparazzi kind of treated her like shit when she was First Lady as well. And stories came out about her newfound ostentatious wealth and her descent into sinning and gold digging and hedonism. It's this fairy princess angel narrative to gold digger pipeline. And this continued on until the start of the 70s. And while a lot of people kind of continued to gawk at her after that, there were some who approached it with the vibe of, hey, maybe we were assholes to Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis for no good reason. In the description below, I've linked a column from May of 1970 that provides an interesting but not really well-aging look at this phenomenon of the sharp criticism of Jackie O and then the subsequent regret. So, why do I bring all that up? Because Stan is watching some kind of news program with Jackie O in it, and I'm trying to narrow down which year over here would span best to have such a program. And if I had to pick a year, it would be late 1968 or early to mid 1969. Because that was when Jackie was being hounded by the paparazzi and criticized for wearing gaudy outfits and bikinis to the beach and wearing mini skirts. Jackie O, what a fox. And I feel like 1969 is the year in this whole range where her name would be most likely to appear on television, especially a television in New Jersey, where she visited in May. So, yeah, 1969 seems like the year that would fit best. At least, the best year while Nixon is in office. Now that we're here, we gotta address the elephant in the room. You've all been screaming it at your screens this whole time. Hannah, doesn't this kinda look a little bit like Lyndon B. Johnson? I know, it kinda looks like Lyndon B. Johnson. Damn you, Johnson, you and Nixon just both have such big fucking noses. And I agree, this is gonna be a tough call. I'm going by the jowls that are really prominent in that portrait in the principal's office. Those jowls are ever present in every political cartoon I could find of Nixon. But that might be a Johnson portrait. I mean, I know I'm probably overthinking this. I know this is Nixon, but they both look like this portrait, right? Tell me, do Lyndon B. Johnson and Richard Nixon both look like this portrait, or am I just white racist? Leave a comment down below if I'm white racist. The good news is that Lyndon B. Johnson's term as president also ended in 1969, just months before this. And he was president when the 1968 school year started, so it's just as easy to say that the principal never took down his Lyndon B. Johnson portrait. But you're not gonna catch me saying this is before spring of 1968. It's just not gonna happen. For one thing, Jackie O wasn't even Jackie O in spring of 1968. She got married in autumn of 1968. Not to mention, 1968 works less with the Stans being 17 going on 18, which is a good high school age. I'm just saying, this seems a lot like 1969. There's a couple more things from this night that we can take a look at. So yeah, this is Stan's Diablo. He leaves his home in New Jersey in it when he's kicked out. Now, I was trying to figure out what car specifically this might be. And I spoke to my friend Paul, who's an expert in vehicles, and he said that it looked like either a mid-60s or early 70s American land yacht. And I gave him some time, and he actually tracked down the exact model that this looks like. Guys, listen, don't cheap out on the cheap sticky notes. Get the Post-its. Just get the Post-its. Oh yeah, so my friend Paul actually figured out what car that this looks the most like. And while the El Diablo does not exist, this is a 1966 Cadillac Eldorado. So we can assume that Stan's car is from 1966 if this is... Oh, what's that? Oh, Alex Hirsch actually said what year this is from?
Stan's car is a 1965 El Diablo convertible, which is a brand of cars that exist in Gravity Falls that is completely fictional.
Ignore everything I just said. It's a 65 Diablo. Sometimes you just gotta Google things. Thank you, Gravity Falls Wiki. I found out a couple more things, but nothing that's really helpful. For example, did you know that the street signs that Stan drives by, the one-way sign, is specifically a sign that can be found in the New York area, and specifically just you know, the eastern coast in the 1950s. It's not helpful, but I know that now. All of this puts the next big date right over here. Spring of 1969. Specifically months after Jackie Onassis remarried, during Nixon's time in office, or at least very shortly after Lyndon B. Johnson's time in office, after their senior prom, when Stan and Ford would have been 17 going on 18, specifically turning 18 the following June. And this is 1969. This is a super tumultuous time in American history. Troops were still being sent to Vietnam. At the age of 18, many young men were required to sign up for the draft. However, many college students would be exempt. I think about this a lot. If being a college student could be a way to avoid being sent to Vietnam, it gives another layer to Ford's feelings with this whole situation, his devastation. Vietnam is also a popular headcanon for where Shermie is. After all, it doesn't make sense for this baby to be Shermie, right? I guess we should address this. Ugh. As someone who's been a Gravity Falls theorist for years now, this baby haunts me like a sleep paralysis demon. Okay, I'm gonna level with you guys. I think the baby is Shermie. I didn't always think that the baby is Shermie. You're gonna find old Tumblr posts from me saying, yeah, the baby can't possibly be Shermie, but listen, I think the baby is Shermie. And this is Alex Hirsch's own damn fault. For one thing, he was asked point blank at Comic-Con whether or not that baby was Shermie, and he just didn't answer.
So, in A Tale of Two Stands, was that baby Shermie Pines?
I cannot talk about the baby. Baby's off limits. Next question.
For another thing, we have this panel in the comics. So, you can't read that, partially because it's small, but also because it's in code. Shermie, and then in code it says, age paradox, time travel connection. And the fact that they're lampshading it like this, clearly they know that they messed up here, right? Like, they did not plan from the beginning for Shermie to have been in Vietnam and for this to be Shermie's kid. They planned on this to be Shermie. Does this seem like the reaction of a guy who actually has a reasonable explanation along the lines of, that's not actually Shermie, that's Shermie's kid?
Baby's off limits. Next question.
No, this is the reaction of someone who is bad at math and who accidentally made Shermie into a preteen parent. And that's fine. I'm bad at math too. You should have seen earlier versions of this script. I've messed up all these dates at least 5 times. I'm probably making mistakes now. So, yeah, I think it's Shermie. But is that so impossible? Let's begin with the fact that this baby is under a year old. He's being swaddled, which you typically stop doing when a baby is between 2 and 4 months old because then they're able to roll around and you want to stop swaddling them, wrapping them super tightly in a blanket. But we're going to be generous because this baby has a very big head. For one thing, this isn't really a show where we can use human proportions to tell the age of someone. And we're going to say this baby was born in the end of 1968. So this is like a 6-month-old baby, you know? And if Dipper and Mabel are born in 1999, which, again, is the most highly believed possibility, then that means almost 31 years have passed between the two events. This is a little bit more generous than the 27 years afforded by the 1972 to 1999 timeline. We bought ourselves like 3 more years at least. Now, we need to fit 2 generations into this 31-year gap. And that needs to include pregnancy time, because pregnancies take between 8 and 10 months. And when I do all this math, which I did ahead of time, that means that Shermie and Shermie's kid were probably between 14 and 15 when they had a kid. Which is a stretch, but it's not quite impossible. Sex education in schools wasn't really commonly found until the late 80s, and it was mostly in response to the AIDS epidemic. So Shermie being a teenage parent was definitely more possible than it is today. The tough thing is, we can't rule out that this isn't Shermie's kid. And God knows that would fit the timeline better, but Alex's reaction just really seals it for me. You really dug your own grave there, Hirsch. You could have just said it was Shermie's kid. There was a whole ass war. Just say he's in the war.
I'm sorry, Mabel, but I have to go fight. In the war!
wanted to show that sometimes families are started younger than typical and that we shouldn't judge. Look, I'm not encouraging teens to have sex, obviously, but if you are gonna have sex, use protection. You know why? Because if you don't, it complicates the fucking timeline. So yeah, I'm just gonna say it. This is Shermie, and it's fine. It's a bit young, but it's fine. It works just fine. Though, you know, this kind of reminds me of something that I think about way too often. Hi, welcome to the I'm annoyed about something inconsequential and I'm deciding to vent about it years later, making it everyone else's problem corner. I'm the personification of wasted fandom passion. Feel free to skip this part if you're not a fan of righteous fury over small things that don't really matter. I just have a lot of feelings trapped inside me. Oh, you want to know my gender? I'm not a boy. I'm not a girl. I'm a pedantic ball of rage. So towards the end of the series at Amazing Houston Comic Con, Alex Hirsch was doing a Q&A panel. He was asked this, which I've shown a couple times in this video already.
Baby's off limits. Next question.
But, of course, this was not the only question he was asked. This panel was hosted shortly after the episode The Stanchurian Candidate aired on Disney. But before this episode aired on Disney, fans already had a little bit of a spoiler. Cecil Baldwin, who voices Cecil from Welcome to Night Vale, put down on his IMDb or something like that he voiced a character named Tad Strange on Gravity Falls. Cecil Baldwin has a pretty deep voice. This is a big name actor. Who could Tad Strange be? Speculation began, but it didn't really take off until a Reddit AMA hosted by Bill Cipher. This AMA, which was Alex Hirsch answering questions in character, was lots of fun. We get a lot of fun tidbits about Bill, a lot of fun pieces of information that may or may not mean anything, and it was a fun time for everyone. But someone did ask Bill who Tad Strange was going to be, and Bill answered, Tad Strange is a real square. A square. So what could this mean? So the Gravity Falls fandom did what the Gravity Falls fandom is amazing at. Speculating, making a theory, and running with it. I mean, yeah, the expression he's a real square could mean this is a boring character who has nothing going for him, but this is Bill Cipher we're talking about. He predominantly speaks in cryptic double meanings. I mean, take a look at this. What does Stan's tattoo mean? Oh, it means watch your step. If Tad Strange is a real square, then Tad Strange is a real square? If you were in the fandom at the time, then you know what people did. They made Tad Strange a real square. And then the Stanchurian Candidate aired, and we gotta look at Tad Strange. Oh boy.
Hi guys, Tad's the name, and being normal's my game.
Loving you, Tad.
And I love bread.
Wow. It looks like Tad Strange was a real square. This is what they used Cecil Baldwin's voice for? So on that panel, Alex was also asked about Tad Strange.
And fans saw that name, Tad Strange, and they said, Tad Strange? Who's this? A new character? What could he look like? All right, everybody, let's put our heads together. Maybe he's... What do we like most? We like Bill. There's not enough Bill, okay? How can there be more Bill? What if Bill had a brother? Yeah, now we're cooking. Bill's a triangle. What if this guy was a square? What if he was purple? That's the opposite color of yellow. They're complementary. Okay, well, we love Doctor Who, so just give him a bowler hat or something. I don't know. Make him as much like Doctor Who or Jack Skellington as possible, because that's what we do. And so then I, wake up one morning to, just the Tad Strange tag has blown up. And there are people dressed as a purple rectangle with a bowler hat, and there's all this fan fiction. No, it's literally, you guys made all of this up, and it has nothing to do with me. They're like, yeah, Mr. Troll, Mr. Trickster, we're not going to believe you. You say no, it means yes. Y'all probably think Tad Strange is still a secret purple demon. Maybe he is. No, he's not. Why would I? It has nothing to do with me. It came from you. It came from you crazy people.
And I understand his frustration, but come on, Alex. They were doing a Gravity Falls. Now, Alex Hirsch did nothing wrong. This isn't a cancel Alex Hirsch video. I'm not gonna act like he burned my crops and fucked my wife. He just didn't remember writing this in the AMA. but I'm still allowed to feel things about it. This isn't even on Alex, honestly. I just distinctly remember a rise of these, like, pick-me Gravity Falls fans who are like, I'm not like these crazy Gravity Falls fans who thought Tad Strange was a square and made up our own character. I'm not one of the square people, I'm a good fan. Which is the smallest distinction to care about. Like, we're all in this saw trap of a fandom together. We're all playing the same game. Now chop off that leg and let's get going. Oh, you thought that a square in a bowler hat was ridiculous? You're right. You're the smartest, coolest fan of a show with a Mr. Peanut triangle, and your dick is so big. Congratulations. I feel like when you create a show built on rewarding people for theorizing, people are gonna theorize. I wasn't even part of the group that thought Tad Strange was, like, going to be a square demon, but I understand where they were coming from. This wasn't like LeBam or Grunkle for Grandpa. This wasn't stupid. You want to talk about outlandish? How about thinking one of the main characters has a long-lost twin brother? Ugh. You know, now that I've said all this out loud and I've put on the makeup and I've broken out the Wonder Bread, I realize this is kind of a small thing to care about. I'm just annoyed at how people who believed that Tad Strange was a square demon were treated after this. But I can't expect Alex Hirsch to remember things like this one answer to an AMA that he answered in the middle of the night on stage months later in front of 200 people. He's not supposed to remember these things. His job is animator, not fan on Tumblr. I think I just needed to voice this frustration somewhere. This has been the Square Tad Strange Truther Defense Squad portion of the video. The tagline is, yeah, I thought you were wrong too, but he didn't need to call you out like that. Gravity Falls fans are just so enthusiastic, you know? That's why everyone I know reacted to these Stan plushes that were circulating online a bit ago like they were the second coming of Jesus. And don't get me wrong, I'm buying these plushes too, but it doesn't change the fact that Ford here looks like a constipated Muppet. Unless... Has Ford always just looked like a constipated Muppet? Huh. Holy shit, yeah, I guess he just looks like that. I guess fan art just really skewed my impression of him. Silver Knight really carried this man across the finish line, huh? And that jawline is doing a lot of legwork. This is the man I read fanfiction about, people. But yeah, Gravity Falls fans really do go all out. I mean, for God's sake, I bought a bowler hat for this segment. When am I gonna wear a bowler hat again? Maybe next year I could be the We Have Babadook at Home version of the Babadook for Halloween. On one hand, I could call this bowler hat a tax write-off. On the other hand, then all the cool IRS guys would know that I own a bowler hat, and I don't think I could live with that shame. God, I look like a Victorian accountant trapped in a biologically non-binary body. Okay, that's not true. I'm not actually biologically non-binary. I'm actually a 90s Ken doll who was brought to life by a witch before gluing on a pair of tits from the medical waste dumpster at the gender affirmation clinic up the road. If you recognize these, I want you to know they've been rehomed to a loving household, and I'm only feeding them an all-organic, fiber-rich diet. Only the best for my babies. Anyways, back to the timeline. Speaking of saw trap escape rooms, Ford is now in college. We don't know too much about Ford's time in college, but we do know that apparently he was dragged to one party, smelled people smoking weed, and then became a hermit for the rest of his high-on-life life. Very cool, drugs are for fools, why do pot when you could do well in school? Ford would never do anything as dangerous as smoke weed. He's too busy not putting guardrails up around his interdimensional portals or handling toxic sealants with his bare hands. Look at this high-intelligence, low-wisdom-ass motherfucker. Speaking of weed, one of the first images we see of Ford has this hippie peace poster in the background, which is pretty much definitely associated with the hippie movement, specifically countering US involvement in Vietnam, which wouldn't have ended until 1975. Now, we can be pretty sure that this is at the beginning of his freshman year because he's wearing the same outfit that he wore to orientation. And now that we know when his senior year of high school was, and assumedly when he enrolled in college, now it's just a matter of figuring out when he finished in college. And the good news is, he kind of tells us.
I went from undergrad to PhD 3 years ahead of schedule.
Oof, fuck. You know in Saw 2 when they have that pit of needles? That's what this is. That's what this is right now. Jesus fucking Christ. So yeah, he goes from undergrad to PhD 3 years ahead of schedule. So how long does it take to get a PhD? Well, in the case of most physics degrees, usually about 5 years after you finish your bachelor's degree. So, you know, between 8 and 9 years total.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
And we can probably break it down as such. Like, a bachelor's degree for Ford probably took 3 years instead of the typical 4. I was able to graduate ahead of schedule just by taking summer classes. So if he spends 3 years on his bachelor's, and then 3 years finishing the rest of the course load, which is difficult but not unheard of, then yeah, he might have finished in 6 years, maybe even 5. And you know what else? In the journal, he just says that he began studying in Gravity Falls in 1975. So it's very possible that this is the year that he got his PhD. Now, I know there's no way of knowing which PhD he got. I mean, we don't know what his specific major was. In fact, he has 12 PhDs. By the way, Ford never says that he got all of his PhDs in this dimension. You know, maybe there was a college dimension where he went to college. The PhDs also could have been honorary PhDs. Honorary PhDs are just PhDs that you get without needing to do all the required classes. Sometimes schools will give them to you if you do some kind of great accomplishment or if you just, like, discover something that gets them a lot of notoriety, which, I mean, if Ford did that for Backup S'more University, I imagine they'd be grateful enough to give him an honorary PhD, but, you know, that's all headcanon. Still, we know he got at least one. 3 years ahead of schedule. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. It's also tough to know for sure what 3 years ahead of schedule means. Again, we don't know if it was a physics degree. It could have been something a little bit easier. But also, 3 years ahead of schedule with what? With his extra course load? He describes taking all these extra physics courses for fun. God. But there is at least one more thing that ties Ford to being in college in at the very least 1974. And that's DD and More D. So it's very convenient, but Ford literally says when DD and More D came out. He specifically says copyright 1974. He then goes on to say, Stanley always mocked my love of this game. Alright, give me a second. So, this is the problem. If DD and More D came out in 1974, which by all estimates is way after Stan and Ford were in high school, then there's no way Stan could have been there to make fun of him for playing DD and More D. Even if we assume that I'm wrong about their senior year being 1969, which it's not, it's right, and even if we say that this should be 1972, which is a more popular fandom headcanon, Stan still would have been kicked out before 1974. And Stanley does not interact with Ford in this time. The next time he sees him is about 10 years later during the Portal incident. So unless Stanley showed up at Backup S'more University to exclusively make fun of Ford for like a couple minutes about playing D&D and then fuck off, this isn't possible. Alright, okay. It's fine. I'm figuring this out. It's fine. So, D&D was not the first tabletop RPG. It was actually based on another one from a few years before, Chainmail. Chainmail is a game that came out a few years earlier and was even developed by one of the developers of D&D, which, of course, DD and More D is completely based off of. Maybe DD and More D had another game that it was based off of. Maybe instead of Chainmail, it was called Steel Plate? Yeah, that sounds like a thing, yeah. Yeah, this makes sense. And Chainmail came out earlier than D&D. It came out in 1971, which would still be too soon for this 1969 date. Okay, But it looks like Chainmail was actually based off of another tabletop RPG. Chainmail was based off of a game called Siege of Bodenberg. This is a picture of it right here. I couldn't find a lot of box art, but you know, this game came out in 1967. If Chainmail is what Steel Plate is based off of, then maybe there's a game that, you know, that Siege of Bodenberg has based on it. Maybe called Siege of Schmodenberg, which means it's just enough time for Ford to be annoyed about Stan making fun of him over here. Which makes sense. So that's what he was talking about when he said Stanley always mocked his love of this game, and maybe he just mixed them up because Ford is stupid and or has bad memory. We fixed it. And what, are you gonna challenge me on that? Look at this tattoo. Is this the tattoo of a wise man? Like I've said before, high intelligence, low wisdom. The other option, of course, is that Ford lied about this. But would he lie about something?
Zephyr! My face is on fire!
I'll just be a sec.
I just said that to make sure you'd come in here quickly.
Ah shit, maybe he just lied. After all, he wrote this when Stan and Ford's relationship was pretty tumultuous, after the scene when Stan calls him a dangerous know-it-all.
My brother is a dangerous know-it-all, and the stuff he's messing with is even worse.
Which we find out later that Ford overheard.
My brother is a dangerous know-it-all.
Maybe he was just writing down this lie about Stan having always hated him.
Hey, Goop, what's up? Cool binder. Hey, Goop, wanna come over to my house today?
They all hated me.
But on the other hand, this was also 30 years after the Portal incident, and over 40 years since they were teenagers. Ford just having bad memory works just as well here, especially if he was just mixing DD and Morty with an earlier tabletop RPG. Whichever one of these you believe, he's wrong. If for no other reason than because Ford was in Gravity Falls studying the paranormal a year later. He got his PhD 3 years ahead of schedule, but he didn't get it in 1 year. So, while Ford was getting his PhD, what about Stan? If you'll allow me to bring our attention back to this over here, it's something I want to call to your attention. Stan has these thin fucking eyebrows that have always bugged me. This is the only place where Stan has thin eyebrows in the whole show. Like, he doesn't have them when he's a car salesman. He doesn't have them when he's selling to ShamWow. He doesn't have them when he's a teenager. He doesn't have them as an adult. But right over here in this sequence with Kara McCorkle, he has these thin eyebrows. And I know that parts of this memory are hallucination-y. But we do have an image that shows these thin eyebrows somewhere else. Right over here. Stetson Pinesfield. This is one of the IDs that we see in A Tale of Two Stands. And it's also notably the only ID where he has these eyebrows. And this one over here for Andrew 8-Ball Alcatraz, his eyebrows are a normal thick size. But for this, nuh-uh, same t-shirt, same hairdo, same thin eyebrows. Now, he wouldn't have had these fake IDs until he was on the run. So this, if this does correspond to this ID, happened sometimes in the 1970s. Assuming that this wasn't a hallucination, we can assume this to be a different year than this date, the one when they were in the movie theater and then Stan punched someone. What I'm thinking is that he reconnected with Carla a few years later while he was still on the East Coast. So, when did this happen? Well, we know from this map of Stan's travels that he began on the East Coast and then just continued to travel west. So, if it was on the East Coast, which is, I'm assuming, where it happened, then it would be closer to the beginning of that whole sequence, so the early 70s. The other clue we get is that Carla in this memory leaves Stan for a hippie, Thistle Down. If this is a hippie, like I said, the United States' involvement in Vietnam was continuing until 1975. But hippie fashion was on the decline. Ever since the whole, Charles Manson incident, people began to look less favorably on the whole hippie vibe and aesthetic, and it kind of completely phased out by the end of 1972. Hey, editing Hannah here. Hippie fashion didn't completely phase out after this, and I don't know why I phrased it like that. Probably because I was filming this at 3 a.m. and was pretty conked out. Wanna see what most of my filming looked like? It was like this. Yeah, anyways, hippie fashion in the mainstream did eventually die out, obviously, but it was way more gradual than just a sudden cut-off in 1972. Something else that happens in this sequence is what Stan calls Carla. Carla Hot Pants McCorkle. So, this is also a term that was very much popular in 1971. So, the term hot pants was at its most popular between 1971 and 1972. Almost completely losing any traction by 1975 when the term, which meant really short booty shorts, became associated with sex workers. But in 1971, they were all the rage. So, if the hippie movement and aesthetic began to completely decline by 1972, and hot pants as a term was at its most popular in 1971, then I'm guessing this happened in 1971, which makes sense because it would have needed to be early on when Stan was still on the east side of the country where Carla lived. So yeah, this date with hot pants happened in 1971. So we know that after that, Stan traveled from state to state to state, using various fake names, starring in various infomercials, selling vacuums and tennis rackets, and betting on the horses. He just continued to move west. And we know that Stan was imprisoned in 3 different countries.
No, you don't understand what I've been through. I've been to prison in 3 different countries. I once had to chew my way out of the trunk of a car. You think you've got problems? I've got a mullet, Stanford!
It's hard to know what all of them are, but we know that at least one of them was Colombia. So, what was he arrested for? Well, he was about to do a heist when he says this.
I've got to be careful this time. No more Colombian nights.
So, probably a heist of some kind. But considering that this man over here, who he calls Jorge, looks very similar to another man, I feel like it could be a different crime. That's right. I feel like Jorge is this man over here, Santiago. He's got the same eye patch, he's got the same build, he's got the same eye shape, and Santiago is a common last name, so I think his full name is Jorge Santiago. And what is he helping Stan with? Pug trafficking.
All right, Santiago, you have 24 hours to get these pugs across the U.S. border.
And what are those pugs full of? Probably cocaine. Yes, I think that Stanley, formerly known as Andrew 8-Ball Alcatraz, probably helped with the Colombian drug cartel. I know, pug trafficking to drug trafficking, really intense code. Have no idea how I cracked that one. But this does give us a time frame for when he was involved with Rico's gang, the one that he's so afraid of a few years later.
Just give me a few more days, Rico. I'll pay your goons back, I swear. I once had to chew my way out of the trunk of a car.
And by the way, this man right here is who he calls Rico, so that's Rico. Now, the cocaine industry in Colombia really began to gain traction in the late 70s, like around 1977. Which makes me think that his involvement with the cartel came at a phase of his life after all of these get-rich-quick schemes. I wish that I had a more concrete date to put on when he joins the cartel, but frankly, late 70s works for me for a range, so I'm gonna put that on the timeline. Cartel. Alright, we figured out a few more dates. This is going great. Ah, shit. I might need some more room. Alright, we're moving into the tangent corner. It's cramped and I'm right by the litter box, but it's okay. We just needed a bit more wall space. We're gonna do this. But this is a good corner. We have Shadow the Hedgehog here. He watches over the apartment and scares away ghosts with his soulful gaze. Isn't that right, Shadow? Okay, so where were we? We left off with the Colombian cartel, I think. Yeah, so while Stan was doing all that, Ford was living his best life in Gravity Falls after graduating. And to piece together his time in Gravity Falls, we just need to use the evidence that we have in Journal 3, which, for the most part, takes place in Gravity Falls. So, luckily, in Journal 3, we have this timeline. It's... Okay. Okay. There. Okay. Do they have fucking diamonds in these walls? Is that why my fucking rent's so high? There. Something soft and supple for my feminine constitution. There you go. So, we have a timeline. 1975 was the year that he arrived in Gravity Falls. And 1981 was the discovery of his muse. His muse, of course, being Bill Cipher. And on the literal first page of Journal 3, the June 18th page, it says that it's been about 6 years since he started investigating Gravity Falls. This makes our lives much easier because, again, he says that he started investigating Gravity Falls in 1975. And lucky for us, that means that he began Journal 3 on June 18th, 1981. I'm gonna go ahead and put that over here. I wrote that kind of weird. It's fine. But again, the timeline also says that 1981 is also the year that he discovered his muse, that he met Bill Cipher. And this works out great. It means that Journal 3 starts right at one of the inciting incidents, him meeting Bill Cipher. This is perfect. It seems to line up great so far. So what does the Muse page say about Bill? The Muse page says that he met Bill 2 years ago. Alright. Okay. Give me a minute here. On one hand, maybe I could say that 2 years ago he just discovered Bill in the cave and that he didn't really meet him, but no, he discovered his muse in 1981. Not to mention, according to the show, him meeting his muse and him discovering the muse seemed to happen around the same time, if not immediately right after.
I read the inscription aloud, but nothing happened. Until later that afternoon when I had the most peculiar dream.
There's no getting around this timeline date. He discovered Bill in 1981. So, what does that mean for the 2 years thing? There's so much we don't get to unpack with this whole page. The My Muse page is really interesting. He calls the guy his muse. This guy? This guy. He's Mr. Peanut with extra steps forward. Whatever. He's a man with issues. Not to mention, if Journal 3's first page takes place the year that he met Bill, and by this page he had met Bill 2 years ago, does that mean that 2 years passed in between page 1 and page 11? You spent a lot of time on those gnomes, my guy. Were the Killbillies that time-consuming to study? How long did it take you to get back from the Southwest after entering the porta potty? Did you crawl back to Gravity Falls? That being said, it's also possible that he edited this page in post or wrote it out of order. After all, the page that was scribbled over, the one about Bill where he goes on and on about how great Bill is and how much he can trust in before kind of scribbling everything out with red Sharpie, that whole page was written on a page after the portal test and the betrayal and him discovering that Bill was evil. So did he unless he wrote all that endearing stuff about Bill just so he could scratch it out, did he do it for the drama? This is the same man that wore a cloak to bury his journal. Can you imagine just, writing a bunch of nice stuff just to scribble it out? Dear Diary, Jackson Braden Noah Williams is the cutest, kindest, most sensitive boy on earth. And I know he'll love me forever. Is what I would say if he wasn't such a dirty, lying, stupid, two-timing, cheating son of a... What's more likely? That he wrote this book out of order? Or that after Bill betrayed him, he wrote a full 2 pages in ink about how great Bill was for the dramatic effect of scribbling it out in red? says a lot that I'm actually not that sure which one it is. For instance, he has a page on Bill in Journal 2. And he also has the portal schematics, which he didn't begin working on until Journal 3 was started, spread throughout each of the books. Ford also says when he brings up the blacklight ink after Bill's betrayal that he's gonna go back to make corrections in invisible ink, so we can't be sure that he didn't edit some things in post, either in blacklight ink or in plain ink. Like I said, we can see plain text changes on the Bill page, so some stuff was written out of order. Which is fine. We're having fun. I'm sure it won't throw us off at all. But does that mean that he didn't write this 2 years after he started writing Journal 3? Does this mean that he didn't write this 2 years after he met Bill? Well, for both of those things, not necessarily. Assuming, of course, that this timeline is correct and that he wasn't lying on these pages. All it does mean is now we have this annoying thing hanging over our heads as we go through the journal, leading us to doubt everything. We do need to take the information that he gives us and assume it's at least somewhat true. I can't have another Siege of Schmodenberg incident on my hands, not in the same video. So this is what I'm thinking. Ford met Bill sometime in 1981. He wrote this My Muse page sometime at the end of 1982. Which would be about 1.5 years, roughly 2 years after this. Yes, we're rounding. It's allowed. If you don't approve of rounding, make your own timeline video. While this is written on a page that's pretty early on in Journal 3, I think it's like page 11 or something, that can be due to it being written out of order by Ford, or him writing it on the back of a page that he intends to throw away. After all, it was written on the back of the page about his childhood. He intended to get rid of the pages about Bill. He's talking about being contacted by a demon from a different realm. He sounds unwell. So yeah, this was written at the end of 1982, about 1.5 years later. Though, I suppose he could have written it in 1983, meaning that it was 2 years later like he says, but that would mean that him discovering that Bill was evil and also the portal incident would need to take place in 1983. And we know that didn't happen. After all, we still have this calendar to account for. The 1982 calendar. Like, this calendar was in a room that was sealed away when Ford disappeared, so the portal incident probably happened in 1982. But I think I'm kind of happy with this ballpark. Let's move on. We have the next page. The next page is the one with Preston Northwest. It's the one where Ford is considering punting this child. And we know that it takes place in August. Specifically, August 3rd. Now, this might be August 3rd, 1981. Like, it might be a continuation of June 18th, 1981. But it's written out of order, so who knows? Let's see. He talks to Preston about the Great Flood of 1863. The Great Flood of 1863. Countless lumberfolk died in the Great Flood of 63. The Great Flood that killed the lumberjack? The same lumberjack who swore to come back and haunt the Northwest's 150 years after his death?
So I said with final breath, 150 years I'll return from death.
But the Great Flood of 1863 being 150 years before the show wouldn't make sense unless the lumberjack came back in 2013. And that would mean that the show takes place in 2013, which would mean that the portal incident happened in 1983. But it's not like the show takes place in 2013.
2013.
Oh my god, the show takes place in 2013. But this changes fucking everything. The wiki says that in 1999, Dipper and Mabel were born. But if the show takes place in 2013, then that would mean that they were born in the year 2000. Their 13th birthday would be on August 31st, the last day of summer. Wait. The last day of summer vacation, I guess. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna put the year 2000 as their date of birth, and I'm gonna put 2013 as the year that the show was set. But if Dipper and Mabel were born in 2000, then that means that Shermie wasn't born 30 to 31 years before. He was born 31 to 32 years before. Which means he wouldn't be 14 as a parent, he'd be 15 as a parent. His kid would probably be 14 as a parent, though, and that's okay. I'm not judging. And, you know, the show taking place in 2013 with the Stans being born in 1951 actually makes this line make a bit more sense.
I'm pushing 70 and I still eat ice cream for dinner.
But most of all, if the portal incident took place 30 years back from 2013, that means that it took place in 1983. But what about the calendar? Like, it definitely says 1982 on it. So I guess I don't always update my calendars. I guess this man just has ADHD, which would give him a bad memory. You know, last year I didn't take down my Christmas tree until February. That doesn't mean it was still Christmas time, it just means I need Adderall. Which would be a great thing to talk to a mental health professional about. If I had one! Thanks, Aaron. But we see a tax form for 2012 in the show. Well, our first inclination might be to say that this means that the year is 2012, but that's a 1040 form. He's reporting his income for the previous year. Taxes are due by April, Stan. It's summer. You're doing your taxes late, Staniel. So does that mean that he wrote the My Muse page in 1983? As long as it was written before he discovered that Bill was evil, yeah, sure, maybe. In theory, he started a Journal 1 and Journal 2 in the time between 1975 and 1981. Which means that in a 6-year span, he wrote 2 journals, which would be about 3 years spent on each, give or take. And considering Journal 3 was like half empty by the time that Dipper got it, yeah, him starting it in the middle of 1981 on June 18th, and then him working on it through to 1983 makes sense. It was only half written by the time he disappeared. We don't know exactly when in 1981 he met Bill Cipher, but if he wrote this in 1983, perhaps at the start of 1983, it could have been any time, really. So, what else do we have to go on? Well, we do have some fun movie references. We have the reference to Phantom Bustifiers on the Category 3 page. We have the Casper reference for the Category 1 Ghost page. We also have the Casper and Wendy reference over here. And, you know, thank God none of these are real names. Like, thank God they don't say Casper and Wendy or Ghostbusters or I'd be in trouble, and none of this timeline would make any sense. The only other thing I can find before Fiddleford visits is an abominable bro man with a tribal tattoo. And he's either a cryptid or any man on Earth named Zach or Dwayne or Ricky or Daryl who was born before 1989. Which works out okay as far as the timeline goes. Tribal tattoos were popular in the 80s and early 90s, but they held back as early as the late 70s. And then we have our next big event. Ford calls Fiddleford.
Fiddleford McGucket, a young but brilliant mechanic who was wasting his talent trying to make personal computers in some garage in Palo Alto.
This happens on July 18th, and because it begins in June 18th and then goes to August 3rd with the Northwests, and then goes to July, assuming these pages are written in order, we can assume at least a year has passed. We've gone from June to August and then back around again to July. And if this progression is accurate, then I'm willing to bet that this means that Fiddleford visits in July of 1982. You know, Fiddleford, his very good buddy who willingly leaves his wife and son to go hanging out with a rugged scientist in a cozy cabin in the woods. Was Fiddleford already divorced at this point? Well, the canon points to no, seeing as he keeps a photo of his wife and son on his desk. But if you're a Fid author shipper, feel free to imagine they were divorced before this. And if you're a Fid author shipper who loves messy cheating scandals, feel free to imagine that Fiddleford's a cheating whore. Yeah, it's less ethical, but the fanfiction is so dramatic. What can I say? I'm a Scorpio moon trapped in an astrology disbelieving ethical person's body. Trans rights. On this page, we also have this floppy disk, which, going by these notches, is specifically a 5 1/4 inch disc, which dates back to 1786. What? Which dates back to 1976. It's late. Also on this page, Fiddleford plays with a Rubik's Cube, and while we don't need to count this as he's not using the name Rubik's Cube exactly, I will say that it being a Rubik's Cube would actually work out perfectly. The Rubik's Cube, which was invented in 1974 as the Hungarian Magic Cube originally, was released internationally in 1980 as the Rubik's Cube, and it kind of became a craze in the United States between 1980 and 1982. There were several books in 1981 on the New York Times bestseller list on how to solve the Rubik's Cube. It was a big deal. So that happening between 1980 and 1982 actually works perfectly for Fiddleford's visit. It's just nice to have something that perfectly fits within this timeline. In the DVD commentary, Stan says that in high school, Ford made a kissing robot with a Rubik's Cube for a mouth.
He built like a kissing practice robot, okay? It was basically a mannequin head with a Rubik's Cube for a mouth and a siren attached to his head that would go off if you were kissing it wrong.
I got this, Alex. Don't worry, I'll get it, Alex. He doesn't even say Cubik's Cube. Like, if he said Cubik's Cube, I could just say, oh, I guess the Cubik's Cube was invented in the 60s instead of the 80s. But no, he says Rubik's Cube. Alex won't even give me that. This isn't like Dee Dee and Morty where there were earlier iterations that it could have been. I can't Siege of Schmodenberg this. There wasn't really a proto-Rubik's Cube that looked like that. So, I need to decide between three options. Option 1 is that this is useless and that I should just give up on the timeline. But that's obviously not going to happen. I'm in too deep. The second option is that the commentary isn't canon, which I guess, maybe. Though, that would mean that this ending of the commentary where Stan and Seuss play catch isn't canon, and that makes me sad.
Football? We don't sell footballs at the Mystery Shack, Seuss.
Oh, yeah, you know, I was just thinking, maybe before you leave for your big adventure with Ford, we could, I don't know, toss the old football around.
Maybe we just gotta treat it similarly to that Gravity Falls Gossiper podcast that Alex did. We could just file it as things that Alex just says off the cuff when he's on the spot that we shouldn't really take to mean much. I mean, he does say in this podcast that Seuss was 12 when the Mystery Shack started.
How many years have you been running the Mystery Shack?
Oh gosh, let's see. Well, Seuss was 12 when I started.
It's a good podcast.
And as good as I am at getting women to just fall for the, you know, to want to take a ride on the Stand of War, you know.
I don't think it's canon, but it's good shit. The last option is that the commentary story is a lie completely made up by Stanley. Which, I mean...
So there I was, in the living room, tenderly nursing him with only the richest of creams.
Yeah, that checks out. I'm voting for the last one. I think it's best for our collective sanity to just decide that the kissing butt incident just didn't really happen. So, a few days after that, Ford and Fiddleford begin an expedition. An expedition during which they both begin their descent into the abyss. Assuming we are right to say that Fiddleford visited in July of 1982, we can assume that they began this expedition to the UFO, or crash site Omega, maybe beginning of August, you know, let's say August, because it seems like not much time has passed. Ford makes this fun reference to Close Encounters. The last thing he wants is a close encounter with the government. The expedition was to get an alien UFO hyperdrive, which was the only thing powerful enough to power an interdimensional portal. The hyperdrive could only run on radioactive waste, which worked out fine. Ford was able to get it at a government waste dump, which actually makes sense with the timeline. The government in this era spent a lot of money on nuclear research throughout the Cold War, and that generated a lot of waste. But before Ford even needed to think about stealing radioactive waste, he needed to travel to the UFO with Fiddleford. It's also around here that they camp out and have their very heterosexual nights spent looking up heterosexually at the stars together and speaking about their heterosexual dreams. I talked a lot about this page in my last video. But the important part of this page, for our purposes, is right over here. Ford would like to be the toast of the scientific community, rubbing elbows with presidents and prize winners. debating politics with Reagan and discussing turtleneck fashion tips with Carl Sagan. Now, that Carl Sagan reference is almost definitely a reference to the turtleneck that Carl Sagan wore in his show Cosmos, which aired in 1980. The show Cosmos, which aired in 1980. The outfit was, of course, the inspiration for Ford's outfit in the show. We love the drip. As for Reagan, well, Reagan was the president at the time, but what does he mean by this? Why is debating Reagan a big deal to him? Also, Ford, didn't you make the mind control tie that got Reagan elected while you were in college? His prototype at a government-funded assignment at college on political persuasion was confiscated by the Men in Black. And then he says in the show that it was used to elect Reagan. He says it was used by Ronald Reagan's masters.
It's a shame there isn't some device that would allow you to control someone else. Oh, wait, of course, yes, there is. A long time ago, I designed a prototype for Ronald Reagan's masters.
So, this man is canonically a flesh puppet for the administration. And Ford knows this. Of course Ford wants to debate him. He knows he'll win. But of course, in the journal, it doesn't specifically mention that the shadow government took the tie to specifically control Ronald Reagan. He just says that the tie was taken from him, which to me communicates that maybe he didn't know what it was going to be used for. And while we might be able to say that he recognized his prototype on TV when Reagan was on televised events, it's just as possible that the tie could have been black or red or blue or something mundane that he wouldn't recognize. So there's a chance that he didn't know about that yet. But also, debate politics with Reagan? What does Ford think that famous scientists do? Scientists don't debate the president. At the most, they'll write a mean op-ed about him in a newspaper. Bill Nye isn't on stage debating Biden. He's fighting conservatives in a Denny's parking lot with his bare fists and teeth. Does Ford think talking to Reagan about politics will be fun? Does Ford like Reagan? Did Ford vote for Reagan? Surely not. For one thing, Ford is queer as hell, and everyone knows that. Well, everyone except Alex Hirsch. Poor guy, he has no idea. He's the only person on Earth who ships Ford X Oracle. That's a rough ship to root for, buddy. I think it only has 2 fics on 803. It still kills me that he accidentally made a character so relatable to queer audiences, just an outcast to society with these soliloquies on how romance baffles him and how he's different. Alex Hirsch really stumbled ass first into perfect representation, and from the sounds of some interviews, he doesn't even like the guy.
I love all the characters of the show.
We're probably safe, honestly. I think Ford, who would absolutely punch a Nazi, would think twice about joining Reagan's homophobic death machine bandwagon. Even if there are some lines in this journal that scream personal responsibility politics, I just can't see him voting for Reagan. Reagan wasn't popular with scientists when he was running, if you couldn't tell. Also, all his terrible crimes against humanity aside, Reagan disbanded a committee that would have brought the US into the metric system, and I feel like that would have annoyed Ford as much as anything. I'm gonna choose to believe that Ford wouldn't do anything as problematic as vote for Ronald Reagan. He was too busy bringing on the apocalypse. Still, it does feel like some extra confirmation that this at least took place during the Reagan presidency, which, of course, was between 1981 and 1989. Maybe Ford just likes debating. This is the same guy who holds debates with his roommates over leg warmers. Is he pro-leg warmer? Is he anti-leg warmer? The two genders. Speaking of leg warmers really became a fad after 1980 with the release of the movies Fame and Xanadu. And they became even more of a fad after When will I learn that my actions have consequences? And leg warmers became even more of a fad in 1983 after the release of the movie Flashdance. In the journal, they call it the latest trend, which implies that it might take place closer to 1980, but we need to remember that these two men look like this. Stanford, do kids still say greetings, Pines might not be the most trendy man. So them discussing a 1980 trend in 1982 actually checks out. And then, on their way back from their expedition to crash site Omega, they ran into the Grimoblin. The Grimoblin attacked and looked Fiddleford directly in his eyes, showing him his worst fear. So, what did Fiddleford see when the Grimoblin looked into his eyes? I don't know. Maybe his family dying, maybe the end of the world, maybe an untacky button down. What matters the most is that the next few days after this were devoted to Fiddleford getting bed rest. And then, a bit later, he shows up to Ford with the schematics for the memory gun. Now remember, we're dating this expedition to 1982 in August, which means that he probably made this memory gun at the end of August in 1982. In the show, they made it seem like the memory gun stuff happened right after the portal incident where Fiddleford got his head stuck in.
I fear we've unleashed a grave danger on the world, one I'd just as soon forget. I quit!
The journal changed it, and that's what we're going with. Sometime after the Grimoblin attack, they do get started on the bunker, this one scene in the episode Into the Bunker. We know that this is happening around the end of summer, before it begins to get chilly, because they mention how hot it gets down there. So I'm assuming that this is end of August, beginning of September, around the same time that they made the memory gun. On the page before this, they actually mention Ford getting the squash with the human face and emotions. And while I cannot accurately state with full confidence the time of year that a squash with human face and emotions would be in season, for most squashes, it is between August and October, so this actually checks out. It's late summer-ish, early autumn-ish when they begin working on the bunker. After that, I believe the next reference is Russian arcade puzzle games, Soviet blocks. They don't actually say Tetris, so it's going down in pink. But Tetris did come out in 1984. It's just a reference. They're just having fun. We're having fun. And right before the reference for that, we have Ford saying in code, Ice, Ice, Baby. A song from 1990. Okay. And he says it like by name too. It's not like Frost, Frost, Infant. No, he says Ice, Ice, Baby.
Let's kick it!
And I feel like I could try my damnedest to like say that Ford came up with this phrasing organically. Like he's not saying Ice, Ice, Baby. He's just saying, "Aw man, this ice in the bunker is cold as ice. Ice, baby." But I don't think that's what's happening. I can't piss on you and say it's raining. I told you that the rule was that if he says the name of an intellectual property, I need to count that into the timeline. Even if the word intellectual in this case is doing a lot of legwork. I can't gaslight gay geek girl boss my way out of this one. We need to find an explanation for Ford saying the name of a song from 1990 in the early 1980s. Alright, Hirsch, let me fix this for you. So, Robert Van Winkle, also known as Vanilla Ice, of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 Secret of the Ooze fame,
Go Ninja, go Ninja, go! Go Ninja, go Ninja, go!
released Ice Ice Baby in 1990. The song was released to critical acclaim and worldwide mutters of, "Hey, isn't that the song from Queen?"
Ice, Ice, Baby.
Which he denied.
Ding 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 diggy ding ding. Ding 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 diggy ding ding. Ding ding ding. That's the way theirs goes. Ours goes ding 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 diggy ding ding. Ding 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 diggy ding ding.
Before being sued by Queen and David Bowie. Because, of course he was sued. And then he proceeded to say, I was joking when I said that. You know, of course I sampled them. And then they all settled out of court. Dun 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Blatantly stolen baseline aside, this personified bag of Cool Ranch Doritos with a soul patch was credited with diversifying hip-hop. People loved the song. I know, history is fucked up. Larry Flick from Billboard commented, "Photogenic white rapper rocks impressively? What the fuck do you mean by photogenic?" This guy is photogenic. If you're gonna be racist, at least pick someone who's actually photogenic. So, that's what Ice Ice Baby is. So what's it doing in 1982-ish? Well, for one thing, Vanilla Ice wrote the lyrics when he was 16. Yes, I know. These very deep lyrics of Ice Ice Baby were written by a teenager. I know, we're all shocked. And he was born in 1967. So he would have turned 16 in late 1983. But that's still too late. Like, that's still far out of this initial reign. And even if that is the date that we're putting on this phrase's origin, on the origin of Ice Ice Baby, when would Ford have heard it? Winkle wrote these lyrics in Florida as a teenager. This wasn't public information. He didn't post them on his MySpace. So it just doesn't make sense unless Ford was omniscient or knew somebody who was omniscient. Maybe somebody shaped like a triangle. Maybe someone who can predict the future or influence the future to fulfill prophecies. Maybe someone who, in the world of Gravity Falls, was already in the ear of many prominent artists and politicians and people in power. Maybe someone whose influence would only be written down by Ford in code to keep it away from Filford's eyes. I don't know, maybe this omniscient being has a top hat, who knows? Now, I know what you're thinking. Hannah, this is crazy. Are you implying that Bill Cipher in the world of Gravity Falls either told Ford about Ice Ice Baby before it was a song, or even that Bill Cipher canonically wrote Ice Ice Baby and told Ford the lyrics before he would eventually tell Robert Van Winkle, aka Vanilla Ice, the lyrics? An artist who we know would shamelessly take music elements and claim them as their own? Yes. Okay. I fixed Ice Ice Baby. Don't say I never did anything for you, Alex. So, sometime in autumn, Ford makes the deal. The deal where he essentially gives Bill full control of his body whenever he falls asleep, and that Bill can just take over whenever.
It's a deal. From now until the end of time.
Just let me into your mind, Stanford.
Please, call me a friend.
And if that sounds like a big old red flag, ooh boy. Yeah, he made a deal with an interdimensional alien hell-bent on destroying our world, but at least Ford wasn't doing anything really bad, like marrying a divorcee or smoking pot. Honestly, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Who among us hasn't given our bodies over to interdimensional demons? I know I'm not innocent. After Ford makes the deal, the day of testing is getting closer and closer. And then the project is ramping up, testing day is soon upon us, and then Filford and Ford meet in the diner. This is the visit when, of course, Filford says, "Hey, maybe don't go through with this. I have a bad feeling about this, Ford." And this date, of course, is January 17th. And if this goes from June to August to July to January, and this begins with 1981, then we can assume that January 17th is January 17th, 1983. So, we're at the beginning of 1983. We're coming up on the Portal incident. It's all coming together. Fuck yeah! But I don't really have any more corkboard space. I really don't have any more wall space that's fit to film with either. Like, this is all the space I have in my apartment, and these walls aren't really great for thumbtacking. I don't have another location to film. This isn't ContraPoints. This is, we have ContraPoints at home and they have weird niche interests ContraPoints. I don't have multiple sets. I just have my one apartment. Not to mention it's like 4 a.m. Okay, I guess this is a sign. I gotta get some sleep. Like, I don't want to. I feel like I'm so close. I made it to January 17th, the day before Fiddleford leaves the project. I'm right there. I'd give anything to put this timeline together. Guess I've waited 6 years to figure this out. I'm gonna find another place to film, but right now I gotta go to bed. Okay. Well, I mean, it's some more wall space. Okay. Where were we? Yes, January 17th, the day before they tested out the portal. Fiddleford and Ford, that is. It didn't go well.
This machine is dangerous. You'll bring about the end of the world with this. Destroy it before it destroys us all!
R.I.P. Fiddleford tells Ford, hey, I think this thing is evil, and then Ford goes, what? No. And then Ford confronts Bill about it, and Bill goes, yeah, it's pretty evil.
Bill, you lied to me. Where does that portal really lead?
Oh, looks like Mr. Brainiac finally got smart.
He could have lied. I think Bill is kind of stupid. Just being blunt. I think I could do better. I guess after 1 trillion years, you get a bit impatient. Regardless, it's here that Ford and Bill go their separate ways. The problem is that whenever Ford falls asleep, Bill can possess him. So he now needs to stay awake. It's hard to figure out exactly how long the paranoid era of Ford is, as in the time when he wasn't sleeping before Stan came to help him out. But the journal does give us some hints. The first indication of passage of time we get in Journal 3 is on the same page when he begins seeing the robed men and the symbol with the eye crossed out, the Society of the Blind Eye, in which he says, after several weeks of researching Bill, he went to town for food. So, what does several weeks mean? Well, several is vague, but I think most of us can agree that several is between, like, a few and a dozen. So 3 to 11? So between 3 and 11 weeks have gone by. It's hard to know exactly what that means, but several weeks. The next passage of time we get is a couple of weeks before he goes to visit his favorite truck stop, the place where he's getting his industrial grade coffee. So a couple weeks I think is pretty typically thought of as 2 weeks, and then this is several. So any number between 3 and 11 plus 2, and that means we now have any time between 5 and 13 weeks. I wish we had more information about how much time is passing, but frankly, we don't have a lot of information about this era of his life at all. The paranoid era is one of the most interesting facets of his life to me, and we only get a few pages about it. Come on, at least fit in a few more details in the blacklight. Oh wait, we didn't have room. We needed a page dedicated to additional platypus facts. And I love the platypus as much as the next guy, but this book cost $150. Initially. Come on, Alex, that's unlock the trauma money. I mean, don't get me wrong, some of this stuff is horrible. I mean, the implications alone of Bill switching words around in Ford's brain, horrifying stuff. But also, I've gotten better trauma for free. 8 out of 10. So, how do we know if 5 weeks have passed or if 13 weeks have passed? Well, we can look at the weather. So, what we have here is a chart showing the average snowfall over a 31-day period for 5 months in Oregon, specifically between December and March. That's 4 months. Now, it's tough because some parts of Oregon don't get any snow at all. It's close to the coast, so some places just don't get a lot of snowfall and some places do. But we know for a fact that wherever this is, there's a blizzard going on whenever Stan shows up. So I don't think that blizzard is happening in March. So that would mean that between 5 and 6 weeks of that, between 5 and 13 week range, I think 5 and 6 weeks is the sweet spot. Because 6 weeks after January 17th would be the end of February, which I think would still be in the blizzard zone, or at least snowy enough to get a few inches when Stan shows up. So how do we know that it's not any sooner than that? We get a good look at what Stan sees through the peephole in New Mexico, at Dead End Flats, when Ford reaches out to him. And there's no snow in that picture. Meaning it needs to be late enough that there would be no snow in New Mexico, but some snow in Oregon. I'm operating on the assumption that Ford is in a high-altitude region of Oregon, since him living near the mountains is an established fact in the journal. I can't do the same for Stan, since we have no idea which altitude in New Mexico Dead End Flats might be in. So I'm just using statewide averages to assume what the weather might be like. And on average in New Mexico, by the end of February, there isn't a lot of snow on the ground, while at the same time in Oregon mountains, there could be a blizzard the same week. Just like Oregon, different parts of New Mexico have different levels of snow at different times of the year, but I'm speaking with averages here. So what do we know about Gravity Falls when Stan does show up? Ford says on the same page that he mentions already having sent for Stan that he wants to go back to the mountain caves and that it will only get more treacherous from here, now that the first snow has fallen. At first glance, this makes no sense, or at the very least is strange because it's past January by now. Of course the snow has already fallen. It was the middle of winter when you tested the portal in January. But the chance of avalanches and slipping go up exponentially when the snow begins to melt in the spring. So if we interpret this as him meaning that he wants to go up the mountains before the start of spring in March, instead of before too much snow falls, it actually works out. I'm sure that's the interpretation that Hirsch intended. So, if all this is right, then we can calculate that Stan loses his brother, pushes him through the interdimensional portal at the end of February of 1983. And I'm going to put a pin in that. At this point, we need to address the obvious elephant in the room. Many fans recall Stan saying it's been 10 years since he's seen his brother, but this is Stan's exact phrasing.
You haven't seen your brother in over 10 years.
Over 10 years. I understand the inclination to keep this number as close to 10 as we can, but I'm going to take this to mean that it's been between 10 and 15 years since Stan has seen his brother. Partly because that's the only way this timeline would make sense, but also because many people wouldn't describe the exact amount of time since a negative traumatic event like being kicked out. Also, it's been well documented that big anniversaries of traumatic events like 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, etc. tend to stick out more in our minds as they pass. This might lend itself to Stan describing it this way. If Stan last saw Ford in late spring of 1969, and it's now the start of 1983, then it's been between 13 and 14 years since he last saw his brother, which is over 10 years. I know the word over is doing a lot of legwork here, but that's the video you clicked on. So again, we're gonna skip forward a bit. Let's talk about the year 2000 again. This is when Dipper and Mabel were born. It would have to be if the show takes place in 2013. And the show would have to take place in 2013 if, just like the journal says, the ghost at the Northwest Mansion came back 150 years after his death in the Great Flood of 1863. Dipper and Mabel being born in 2000 also means that they sufficiently skipped the 90s, which Dipper said that he skipped.
Too many dungeons and all that! Updated for the non-double deuce! Available wherever dope games are sold! Peace!
Must have been dark times, those 90s.
Yeesh.
Dipper was born a few minutes after Mabel. Mabel punched the doctor on her way out, and Dipper had his umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. We actually get all of these details in that one video game that almost nobody played. It's a pretty neat game.
Oh my god, a total square. Is he fucking mocking us?
We only get any more details about Dipper and Mabel's life between the ages of 0 and 12 in the flashbacks in the second to last episode, or third to last episode of the show. In elementary school and picture day, for example. You know that really frustrating memory? The one where Dipper could have just given Mabel the hat? It would have been just as meaningful. He's insecure, it's why he wears a hat. Just give Mabel the hat, you don't need to shave your head. Then we have the flashback to the 4th grade. The one showing his lucky hat. You know, the one that he's worn every day since the 5th grade. Plot hole ding. Again, I'm not even gonna ding it. I don't care that much. If I'm gonna plot hole ding anyone, it's gonna be the Northwest Ghost.
150 years ago this day, the Northwests asked us lumberfolk to build them a mansion atop the hill.
Oh, so 150 years ago wasn't the day that you died, it was the day that you started making the house, and then a few years passed, and then you died. And then 150 years later, you came back?
And so I said with final breath, 150 years I'll return from death.
Sure. Plot hole ding. You know, which one is it? And it makes a difference because they spend a few years making the house. But you know what? We have more instances of them saying that it's 150 years from his death, so that's what we're going with. Maybe the evil ghost is a liar. Who knows? I wonder how much of this timeline can be solved by just saying everyone's a liar. You know the discrepancy with when D&D was invented? Fuck it. Ford lied. Stan never made fun of him. We fixed it. By the way, I know that someone is gonna bring up the fact that the calendar that Stan holds up in the Summerween episode is a June 2012 calendar, but we've already established these Pines men do not maintain current calendars. And I also know that somebody is gonna bring up that the calendar in Dipper and Mabel vs. the Future is the August 2012 calendar. But I took out the August 2013 calendar, and I saw that this date would land on the 30th in that calendar. And then I checked the Hebrew calendar to see what their Hebrew birthday would be, and it was August 6, 2013. But wouldn't it have been absolutely buck fucking wild if it was August 30th? I would have shit myself. Coincidentally, Dipper, if he was celebrating his bar mitzvah, would also reach bar mitzvah at 12, so that's neat. Shout out to Chabad.org. It's the unsung hero of this Gravity Falls YouTube video. But yeah, I don't really have an explanation for this calendar being a 2012 calendar. But hey, you know what? We're on a roll. From here on out, we can just fill in the pieces. For example, the party at the shack that Stan throws to bring in customers is actually between June 14th and June 18th, which means it's possible that it could have just been a party that he was throwing for his own birthday.
Whose birthday is it again? Nobody's.
This whole time, it could have been a secret, depressing birthday party that he's throwing for himself. Yay! Something else we have in the journal is that after Wordmageddon, Ford shows Stan memories on an 8mm tape projector. But it could also be a Super 8 film projector, it's tough to tell the difference. But the thing that matters is that the projector looks similar to models from the mid-60s. So, assuming they bought the projector around the same time that they took the film, and the film shows them around the same age as they were in A Tale of Two Stands, then this means that they looked like this in the mid-60s. You really threw me off with that Lil Brucey quote, but I was 3 steps ahead of you, Terrace. It's 1964. You can't change my mind. And it's around here, towards the end of the book, that Ford says that Dipper was a smarter man at 13 than he was at 30, which implies to me that he met Bill Cipher when he was around 30. And if he was 12 going on 13 in 1964, which I'm not letting you change my mind on it, I pulled out the Hebrew calendar, and if he was 17 going on 18 in 1969, well then he would have turned 30 in 1981. And we know for a fact that he was in his 30s in 1981 because he says it when he's talking about the category 1 go. Where is it? Here it is. When he says it when he's talking about the category 1 go. So he turned 30 in 1981, and 1981 was also the year that he discovered his muse. All the pieces fit. So when exactly did he meet Bill? Well, he would have had to be 30, so, you know, after June of 1981. But we're doing it. We're putting it all together. We can put anything we want on this timeline. We have all the pieces. You want to know when Stan was wearing those shorts that Sue said he liked? Probably in the late 1970s. He was a roller disco queen, baby. Must have been before he joined the cartel. Or hell, maybe even after. Even people in the cartel need hobbies. You want to know when Ford dated a siren? Well, we don't know for sure, but it was probably before Journal 3 was written, so between 1975 and 1981. Pick a date. Want to know when Wendy was born? She's 15 in 2013, so she was born in 97, maybe early 98. You want to know when Fiddleford lost his memory? Well, in the journal, he made the memory guns after the Grimoblin incident. And going by the number of days passed in the video of his memories, he began going visibly insane around 74 days in. He stopped shaving, he started getting more confused. So yeah, I'd say he began losing his mind like 75 days after the incident, which means... Wait. 75 days? We know that Fiddleford began making the memory gun shortly after the Grimoblin incident. And the Grimoblin incident happened on the expedition. That happened like a month after Fiddleford showed up. So he would have made the memory gun, you know, late August, early September. Around the same time as the squash with the human face. They get the squash with the human face and emotions at the carnival, and he talks to Blind Ivan at the carnival, which means he had already begun making the memory gun by then. Remember, squash are in season August to October. And we know it's in the early months of those range, probably August and September, because they begin working in the bunker and they comment how hot it gets down there. It wouldn't be hot down there if it wasn't summer. But if he loses his memory like 74 days after that, well then, he's probably lost his memory in November, maybe early December. And in that case, it's too soon for him to begin losing his mind for all of this to add up. He has his faculties about him when they test out the portal on January 17th. And this isn't like the Northwest Ghost thing where we can just say, oh, he said the wrong day from which the 150 years later is counted. Like, this isn't an instance of bad memory or just shitty recall. We have the date on the tapes. It's day 74 after the day he invented the memory gun. Not to mention, in those tapes, Fiddleford says that he's been working for 1 year with a traveling researcher.
For the past year, I have been working as an assistant for a visiting researcher.
And this is despite the fact that the Grimoblin incident seems to have happened like a month into Fiddleford visiting. And two, Ford's been there for the better part of a decade. What do you mean traveling researcher, Fiddleford? You drove up from California last month. You should know this, Fiddleford. Cue the sad Naruto music. Fiddleford's a fake Gravity Falls fan. It just doesn't line up. If he started making the memory gun after the Grimoblin incident, then he began going visibly insane at the end of 1982, not 1983, which would mean that the portal incident couldn't happen in 1983, which means this is all wrong. Like, there needs to be something concrete holding all this to 1983, but I just don't have anything from that year. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any real-world references from 1983 in the journal that would specifically tie or confirm that Ford was even in this dimension in 1983. The closest evidence we have for when Ford was booted through the portal is the calendar showing 1982. Maybe this was all a bit much. Maybe I was a little bit too hung up on this. I just wanted this timeline to work really badly. I wanted it to be perfect. The story of Gravity Falls' conception, of it being Alex Hirsch's first show right off the gate, it's so inspiring. His first project took off, just like how my first project took off, and now there's all these expectations. Maybe I was putting too much pressure on all this, you know? I mean, no piece of art is perfect. God knows Gravity Falls isn't. And maybe this timeline crap is all beyond the point. Frankly, even with these flaws, the Gravity Falls timeline aligns better than some live-action adult television show timelines. These plot holes aren't glaring, and the only reason I'm able to find it is because I'm obsessive and have a problem. The fact that I'm noticing things like what outfit Carl Sagan is wearing in this poster for 5 seconds on screen is a testament to how many times I've watched this episode. And I've watched these episodes so many times because I love Gravity Falls. Alex Hirsch set out to make a show about characters, first and foremost, not about, like, Jacqueline Kennedy. He had a narrative to provide, not a timeline. And maybe that's what I gotta accept, you know? It's okay to have imperfect content, even if this timeline video doesn't crack the timeline. My second video doesn't have to be the best video ever. It's okay if every piece of the puzzle doesn't perfectly fit. I probably should have stopped when I got to Ice Ice Baby, huh? Can you believe he stumbled on this bar mitzvah thing? The bar mitzvah thing makes me mad, because it was probably an accident. You ever just stumble ass first into the timeline making sense sometimes? Ugh. Okay. Gravity Falls' timeline isn't perfect. And that's okay. See, Eric, I don't need you. I came to that conclusion on my own. Even if I did need to rip off a few arm hairs with that fork bit. It was a lot of glue. A lot of glue that should not have been on my body. I guess I should just take down this shit and go home. Still, you know, I really did want this timeline to make sense. It's something I've been working on for years, you know? There go my sweet dreams. Sweet dreams. Sweet dreams are made of this. Sweet dreams are made of this? We can talk about how the only band he seems to ask about when he comes back is the Eurythmics. Which leads me to assume that the Eurythmics are his favorite. Were you just picking an 80s band with a song that gave you Ford vibes? You asked, hey Rob, what's a song from the 80s? And Rob went, Sweet Dreams Are Made of This? And you went, is that from 82 or 83? Ah, fuck it. The timeline's all bullshit anyways. The Eurythmics. Are they the last piece? Did Alex choose the Eurythmics on purpose? Because Ford specifies when he comes back that he is looking forward to the next chart topper. The latest chart topper from the Eurythmics. And that implies that he was here for the last one. And the Eurythmics' first chart topper was Sweet Dreams Are Made of This, released in 1983. And this album has a concrete publish date. Like, forget about the memory gun. Fuck this. Maybe basing Philford's whole deal on how mentally ill he looks was a bad call. Look at this picture. He probably just hasn't shaved in a couple of days. He's fine. He probably just shaved the next day and then faked it till he made it for the rest of the project till January. He doesn't need to look mentally ill to be mentally ill. Mental illness is invisible most of the time. I mean, look at me. If I didn't say anything, I bet you'd have no idea that I'm very neurotic. Philford could have just shaved before the portal incident. In fact, we have evidence that this is a short amount of time of facial hair. Ford knows how fast Philford's hair grows, and this is nothing to how he looks like 185 days later. So maybe the 185-day mark is when we should count when he's lost his mind. I mean, even if it does mean that he's had that projection of failure up on his wall for like 6 months by the time they test out the portal. Like, that entire time he was 99% sure that the portal was gonna end all of humanity, but he was just like, I have more pressing matters, like buying a squash with human face and emotions for Ford. Come on, this little guy's in season. I'm kidding. Philford did nothing wrong. Not even when he started a cult that non-consensually erased people's memories. But forget Philford, that unflawed paragon of man descended from the right hand of God himself. Do you realize what this means? It means we've done it. Because the details of the memory gun might be a bit murky, but you know what isn't murky? Sweet Dreams Are Made of This was released on January 4th, 1983. And that's it. We have a concrete date, a concrete reference confirming that the portal incident took place in 1983. Because how else could Ford have heard that song? That's the timeline. We did it in full. The Stands Are Born, June 15th, 1951. Again, we know this. I took out the Hebrew calendar. And no, of course Alex Hirsch didn't fall ass backwards into this by accident. Of course it was intentional, and you can't convince me otherwise. They find a Stan War in 1964, shortly before they turn 13. Stan gets kicked out in spring of 1969, right before they turn 18. Ford later this year starts at Backup S'more University. Ford graduates from Backup S'more at the very earliest in 1974 spring, but probably closer to 1975. But it couldn't have been earlier because we know that he played Dee Dee and Morty in college. Meanwhile, Stan is dating Carla Hot Pants McCorkle yet again, probably in 1971. Ford moves to Gravity Falls in 1975 and begins studying the paranormal. Ford starts Journal 3 in 1981. He meets Bill in 1981. Fiddleford shows up in 1982. Fiddleford begins making his memory gun in 1982, and in that tape, he lies. And he says when he's testing out the memory gun that he's been in Gravity Falls for a year. But that man is lying. Why is he lying? I don't know. Maybe the guilt of knowing the apocalypse is coming and he's not gonna do anything to really stop it. Fiddleford falls through the portal, his head poking through on January 18th, 1983, and immediately after that, Ford begins kind of falling apart, realizing that Bill is evil, and, I don't know, probably lulls himself to sleep through the one song that we know he likes. Sweet dreams are made of this. If there's anything I know about fictional characters having a favorite whatever, it's that they only engage with that one thing and nothing else. So he probably listened to that song on loop. I just love the idea of him slowly losing his mind to the sound of Annie Lennox's sweet voice. And then 5 weeks later, while it's snowy in Oregon, but not that snowy in New Mexico, maybe 6 weeks, who knows, Stan shows up and he pushes Ford completely through the portal in what I'm thinking is late February 1983. In the year 2000, Dipper and Mabel are born to a set of teenage parents, which is fine. I don't judge. Unless, of course, you think that Shermie was in the war and that baby is his kid. But you know, I don't know. Again, is this the reaction of the man who intended for that baby to be Shermie's kid?
Next question.
But then, in the summer of 2013, 150 years after the Northwest Mansion ghost gets an axe through his head, but also 30 years after Ford gets pushed through the interdimensional portal, Dipper and Mabel go to visit their great-uncle Stan in the sleepy town of Gravity Falls, Oregon. I can't believe we did it. Everything falls into place. This whole time I thought it made no sense, but he made it work. Alex Hirsch, you maniac, you beautiful fucking genius, you made it work. And so intentionally, too. All of it was planned. They knew that June 15th, 1951 was the only date that made sense for the Stans to reach Bar Mitzvah at 12. They knew that Sharpies came out in 1964. And they knew that Jackie O was photographed visiting her stables in New Jersey in 1969 and that it would have made the local news. They knew that the term hot pants was on the decline in 1971. They knew that the Colombian cartel was on the rise in 1977. And they knew that Sweet Dreams Are Made of This was released in January 4th, 1983, just in time for Ford to listen to that and nothing else before he was pushed through the portal. The portal incident only works in 1983 and he knew it all along. This calendar is a red herring. Alex was just throwing me off. But now we both know the truth. Oh my god, he was always 8 steps ahead of me. Alex Hirsch isn't a hack. He's a bona fide genius. The Eurythmics was the key. I can't believe I cracked it. You know, I think I should probably have something about Seuss on here. I just realized I went through the entirety of the show's timeline and I didn't mention the guy once. Alright, let's get Seuss on here for posterity. Let's do it. Okay, so we know Seuss's birthday. According to his ID, it's July 13th. Easy stuff. They show it plainly in the episode about his birthday. God, if only they showed the ID of every character in the show, it would make my day a lot easier, don't you think? You really could have saved me some time, Alex. Let's see, and in July 13th, in Journal 3... So, in July 13th, in Journal 3, we're in the middle of, the Mama Stan dinosaur arc. Riveting stuff, I know. I'm really glad we don't have any more pages about Paranoid Ford in here. But there's no mention of Seuss's birthday until, let's see, after July 29th. So, like, August. That makes no sense. Like, Ford's stuff we can't be sure was written chronologically. He had that bill page after he was betrayed, after all. But Dipper this entire time has been sticking to the chronological events of the show written down chronologically. Just like, makes no sense that he'd write this on the wrong page. Unless the writers of the journal forgot one of the only episodes that they gave a canon in-series date to. Alex, you hack. Wait. If the teenagers who led to the death of Ma and Pa Duskerton with their newfangled rap music did so in 1995, which we know because we see the last newspaper delivered to the convenience store in the episode The Inconveniencing, then how could they have been, like, outside the store in 1983 when Stan shows up? I'm done with the video. I'm done with the video. We're done. We're not doing this again. Hey, how's it going? Coming at you at the end of the video. So, I have here an inkbox tattoo. Specifically, an inkbox tattoo of the All-Star tattoo. You know, Ford's tattoo. This is the thing. My original plan was to have this inkbox tattoo on my neck for the last part of the video. But the thing is, I have ADHD, and I forgot. I just forgot to put the inkbox tattoo on my neck. Look at how it would have looked. It would have been so funny. You all would have laughed. I would have laughed while editing. We all would have had a good laugh about it. We would have been like, haha. It would have been great. But that didn't happen. So, what the fuck am I gonna do with this? You see, inkbox tattoos last a couple weeks. I think it's like 2-ish weeks. Depending on how much you shower, so maybe it'll last a month for me. The thing is, I don't plan on covering a lot of Gravity Falls videos in the near future. My next 2 or 3 videos I have planned have nothing to do with Gravity Falls. I could still put this on, but I don't think it would necessarily, like, match the video. So, I have a couple options. My first option is to put this on for my next Gravity Falls video. And I do have one in my mind, but it'll be a while before I get to it. The second option is, I put on the tattoo when I reach 50 patrons on Patreon. I think that's a good call. When I reach 50 patrons on Patreon, I will do a 1-hour stream during which I apply this Inkbox tattoo. It needs to like stay stuck on my neck for like an hour if I read the instructions correctly. And you know, it'll be a fun little Q&A stream, and I'll need to wear this. This is going to greatly impact my life. I have Zoom calls with coworkers. They're gonna see this on my neck. And, you know, on one hand, I want to say that they'll be really surprised and scandalized, but if I explain it's a Gravity Falls tattoo, they'll probably all go, yeah, that sounds like something Hana would do. Anyways, when I have 50 patrons, I'm gonna put this on. And then I have something else decided. I think when I reach 100 patrons, I'll get a second Inkbox tattoo, decided upon by the patrons. I think that sounds fun. Does that sound fun to you? It sounds fun to me. I'll make a second tier on Patreon. Right now I only have the one that's $3, and I'll make one that's a bit higher, for people to actually pick out what the tattoo is going to be. It'll be called the Pick My Patron Tattoo tier list. I think that'll be fun. And yeah, you know, why not? So, yeah. Somebody